This government, this party remains absolutely committed to devolution and that Barnett formula and more investment into Scotland.
Gregory Campbell.
Number 7.
Mr Speaker, the United Kingdom Government has taken action to make trade between Scotland and Northern Ireland easier. The UK Government is also committed to providing funding to deliver targeted improvements to the A75 road. This will provide better links between Cairn Ryan ferry terminals serving Northern Ireland and South West Scotland, benefiting businesses on both sides of the North Channel.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the reply the Minister has given us. He will understand, like many do, that the economic powerhouse of the United Kingdom is usually centred in the southeast of England, and thus to the detriment of the southwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Will he do more to ensure that that small 12-mile stretch of water between Scotland and Northern Ireland is bridged in business terms by greater cooperation and expansion opportunities for people on either side of that 12-mile stretch?
Mr Speaker, the honourable member makes a very important point. I fully recognise the very strong links that exist between South West Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the potential to enhance those economic ties are great. Improved transport links are undoubtedly part of that with the A75 and ferry links. I look forward to working with him to see how we might be able to enhance and improve those links moving forward.
The Select Committee Speaker Shaw.
Speaker, Scottish businesses would give their right arm to have the arrangements that Northern Irish businesses have with their access to the single market and all the competitive advantages that brings. The Prime Minister has described Northern Ireland as one of the world's most exciting economic zones. Does he agree with that? And what's he doing to ensure that Scotland gets the same arrangements?
Mr Speaker, well, I thought the honourable member was going to stand up to tell me how great the House of Lords was now, a bit like his honourable friends, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, in a sort of preemptive job application. Mr Speaker, Scotland is not Northern Ireland and does not share the land border with an EU country. It's disappointing the SNP seeking to play party politics with the situation in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, as the SNP well knows, has a unique place in the United Kingdom, and we will protect that.
Alan Smith.
Number 8, sir.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government works tirelessly to promote Scottish interests around the world through our extensive diplomatic network, forging business links and generating trade and investments. Our response to the Scottish Affairs Committee's recent inquiry in Scotland's international position highlights the extensive efforts we undertake to achieve this.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm afraid I don't share the Minister's Panglossian view of this. Would you share my concern that recently published figures which show that in the years 2019 to 21, Scottish exports to the EU fell from 16.95 billion to 14.97 billion. Whatever the UK Government's doing, it's not working. So the Scottish Government has a pressing need to promote ourselves overseas for our economy and our society. Would the Minister not agree that now's the time to increase that overseas promotion, not cut it back on domestic wrangles?
Mr Speaker, given the member's interest in this area, perhaps he could speak with his SNP colleagues in the Scottish Parliament. They are cutting funding to South of Scotland enterprise, which will mean less support for businesses in the south of Scotland to grow, innovate and export. Perhaps he could tell the First Minister of Scotland that promoting Scotland overseas begins with supporting businesses at home in Scotland.
Jamie Stone.
Number 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government recognises the important job that all NHS workers do, including those in the ambulance service. I see this every day of the week in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. The UK Government would be open to exploring with the Scottish Government how we can work together and share best practice to reduce ambulance waiting times in all parts of the United Kingdom.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Speaker, last year in Scotland, almost 3,000 people had to wait more than 8 hours for an ambulance. But in recent days, women who might have to travel a 2.5-hour drive to Rigmore Hospital in Inverness to give birth or for specialised treatment, they haven't been able to travel at all because the roads have been closed owing to the terrible weather we've had. Does the Minister share my deep anxiety for any woman who lives over 100 miles away from Rigmore Hospital.
Mr. Speaker, I share the honourable member's concerns and agree that these long distances are not acceptable, but it tells you all you need to know about the NHS in rural Scotland. NHS Highlands have said that it will need to substantially reduce spend following the SNP government's budget in December. The SNP government is taking a slash and burn approach to the rural NHS across Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Sir.
Mr. Speaker, the autumn statement supported families and set measures to grow the Scottish economy. With a stronger fiscal outlook, the Government has the space to cut taxes for hard-working people and businesses. This is highlighted by cuts to national insurance benefiting 2.4 million people in Scotland, and the extension of full expensing, ensuring the UK has one of the most competitive business tax regimes in the world.
Order, order. Please, don't walk in front of members like that. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is correct that the autumn statement from this UK Conservative government provided tax cuts for millions of Scots, provided support for businesses and invested to grow the economy. That was in stark contrast from the SNP's budget last month, which hiked taxes on hard-working Scots, failed to pass on the support to hospitality, retailing and tourism sectors, and has been widely criticised across Scotland. So does the Minister agree, as I do, with Sir Tom Hunter, who said at the weekend that the business community in Scotland doesn't believe the SNP has their back, and that must change?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I agree with my honourable friend, and Sir Tom is right too. Traders in Scotland have accused the SNP government of undermining the rejuvenation of high streets across Scotland with their tax hikes of 6.7% through business rates. The SNP must stop attacking employers and high street traders who are already under tremendous financial strain because of the SNP's mismanagement of Scotland's economy.
Despite devolution rendering it pointless, the budget of the Scotland Office, along with that of the Attorney-General, has jumped by over £3 million since 2018-19, leaping up by £1.2 million just last year, while the Scottish Government's budget allocation suffered a real terms cut. Around 80 people currently work in Queen Elizabeth House alone for the Scotland Office, along with around 30 deluxe civil servants. What on earth are they doing, and how does he justify that to the Scottish taxpayer?
Mr. Speaker, the team at the Scotland Office, both in Dover House and in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh, are doing a tremendous job supporting Scotland across the United Kingdom and around the world. I'd be very happy to welcome the Honourable Lady to join me to meet some of them so you can understand more clearly the important work that they do on our behalf across the UK.
That completes Scottish questions. We now come to the Prime Minister, but I just want to announce to the House we are joined today by the President of the Chamber of Deputies of Parliament of the Czech Republic. Welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Richard Thompson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know that members from across the House will want to join me in offering our best wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, this afternoon I shall be meeting the extraordinary 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, Lily Ebert. Lily promised that if she survived Auschwitz, she would tell the world the truth of what happened. Never has such a promise been so profoundly fulfilled. And as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day on Saturday, I'm sure the whole House will join me in reaffirming our promise to Lily that we will never forget.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I echo the Prime Minister's comments on World Holocaust Day? My constituents, like all of our constituents, rely on the Royal Mail to deliver important items of mail and packages and for people to run their businesses. So they'll be very alarmed to learn of proposals from Ofcom that Royal Mail might be allowed to cut the number of days that they might be able to, that they will provide that service. Can the Prime Minister give a commitment to me here today that under his watch there will be no reduction in postal services provided by the Royal Mail in Scotland or anywhere else?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree about the importance of the Royal Mail's universal service obligation, and as you will have heard from the Minister this morning, we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that it remains as it is.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lib Dem-run council in Eastleigh has just received a report from their external auditors warning of the possibility of fraud and ignoring whistleblowers who try to warn them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Lib Dem leaders who shun accountability, shun transparency and simply say "not me, Gov" should start showing some remorse and responsibility or make way for those who will?
Well,
We'll hear the answer. Come on, Prime.
my honourable friend raises an important matter to the people of Eastleigh, which I was pleased to discuss with him on my recent visit to his area, and I know that the contents of the report are deeply concerning. It is disappointing to see this Liberal Democrat-run council rack up debt with absolutely no plan for how to fund it. And the council has been issued with a best value notice, and I know that he is talking to the Department of Levelling Up, who will be monitoring the situation closely.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, and in his comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? Never again must be said more defiantly this year, as it's said every year. Mr. Speaker, last week we lost Sir Tony Lloyd, a true public servant who touched the lives of many people across the House and across the country. And I'm glad that his family were here yesterday to hear the many tributes to and memories of Tony. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's had quite a week, from endlessly fighting with his own MPs to collapsing in laughter when he was asked by a member of the public about NHS waiting lists. So I was glad to hear that he managed to take some time off.
Can I just say, I wanted to the Prime Minister, I'm certainly going to hear the Leader of the Opposition. Those people who don't want to hear, they can certainly leave, because that's who it's going to be, so get it in order. Some of you are wanting to catch my eye again. It's not a good way to do it.
Mr. Speaker, I love this quaint tradition where the more they slag him off behind his back, the later they cheer in here. Keep it going.
And also, for this side, you can have a joint cup of tea. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I was glad to see that he managed to get some time off yesterday afternoon to kick back, relax and accidentally record a candid video for Nigel Farage. The only thing missing from that punishing schedule is any sort of governing or leadership. So was he surprised to see one of his own MPs say that he doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what people want?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about what Britain needs, what Britain wants, what Britain values. This from a man who takes the knee, Mr. Speaker, who wanted to abolish the monarchy, who still doesn't know what a woman is, and who just this week, one of his front benchers said that they back teaching divisive white privilege in our schools, Mr. Speaker. Looking at his record, it's crystal clear which one of us doesn't get Britain's values.
Mr. Speaker, he spouts so much nonsense, no wonder they're giving up on him. And even now, as his government crumbles around him and his own MPs point out he's out of touch, got no plan for growth, crime or building houses, the Prime Minister is sticking to his one-man Pollyanna show. Everything's fine. People should be grateful to him. The trouble is, no one's buying it. Does he actually understand why his own MPs say he doesn't understand Britain and that he is an obstacle to recovery?
Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, he calls it nonsense, but these are his positions, Mr. Speaker. Right? And he doesn't want to talk about it, but this is the fact. He chose to represent a now prescribed terrorist group, Mr. Speaker. He chose to campaign against the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker, just like he chose to serve the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, Mr. Speaker. That's his record, those are his values, and that is exactly how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, in 2008, I was the Director of Public Prosecution, putting terrorists and murderers in jail. He was making millions betting on the misery of working people during the financial crisis. And we've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant. And that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
Mr. Speaker, yet more sniping from the sidelines. Yeah, you can see exactly why Hizb ut-Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
It's not the sidelines, it's behind him that the fire's coming in, Mr. Speaker. And he can try and blame the Labour Party all he wants. The difference is, I've changed my party, he's bullied by his party. And has he found the time in his busy schedule to work out why thousands of parents are being told by their nurseries that they won't get free childcare that he promised them?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's see what his party is offering the country. Right, so we all know, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have many ideas for our country.
I'm going to hear the Prime Minister.
Well, he doesn't have many, but one thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that...
You don't want to push it, do you? No.
We do know that he's committed to his 2030 decarbonisation promise, Mr. Speaker, which they say will cost £28 billion. But I was reading about it this week. He says he's changed the party. One of his team called it an albatross hanging around their neck. That might have been the Shadow Chancellor, maybe, Mr. Speaker. But he said they're doubling down on it. All this ahead of a crunch meeting, we're told this week, for them to work out how they're going to pay for it. I can save them some time because we all know the answer. Higher taxes for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that crashed the economy. They're sitting right there, right there. And
Oh, Mr. Holmes, you've had your question already. Obviously, you don't want to remain for the rest of it. Here's Salma.
He has Mr. 25 tax rises. And he's got nothing to say on childcare. Millions of families will have been listening for an answer, and they got absolutely nothing. He announced that scheme a year ago, claiming it would get 60,000 parents back into work. Only on Monday of this week did he notice there was some, in his words, practical issues with that. 8 weeks before its launch, parents can't budget, plan for work or make arrangements with their employers. And the Prime Minister's response is to say it's all fine, it's the fault of the Labour Party. Is this merely a practical issue, or is it yet another example of him simply not understanding how life works for other people?
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering the biggest ever expansion of childcare in this country's history, Mr. Speaker. But while millions of parents will benefit from that, again, it's right that he should come clean with them about the cost that his plans will impose on all of them. He goes on and on about the Green Promise, Mr. Speaker. He says he wants to keep it. He says he wants to keep it, but he doesn't have a plan to pay for it. What he's really saying is he'll scrap the borrowing associated, but he wants to keep the £28 billion of spending. So, for all those working families who are benefiting from our free childcare, he should come clean with them now. Why doesn't he come clean with them now? Come clean with them now, and just be clear, his plans mean back to square one and higher taxes for British people.
Mr. Speaker, making steelworkers redundant and failing to provide childcare is not a plan, Prime Minister. It's a farce. It's a farce. And he may soon discover that with childcare, there's an IT problem. Nurseries haven't got the spaces. They haven't got the staff. There's a black hole in their budget, and it's 8 weeks to go. That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. But I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete shit show. Who was it who briefed that to the Times? Hands up. Will the Prime Minister finally realise...
I'll decide how long the question goes. Those who wish don't hear it, I've told you the answer, and I'll help you on the way. Keir Starmer.
When will the Prime Minister finally realise that the biggest practical issue facing Britain is the constant farcical incompetence of the government that he leads?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas, absolutely no ideas as country, and absolutely no plan. He talked about the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the economy, but he never actually brings it up, and we all know why, Mr. Speaker, because things are improving and we are making progress. Wages now rising, Mr. Speaker, debt on track to be reduced, and inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%, because he actually knows that our plan is working and that his £28 billion tax grab will take Britain back to square one. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the choice. It's back to square one and higher taxes with him, or a plan that's delivering a brighter future with the Conservatives.
Change of gear, Mr. Speaker. Too many oligarchs and kleptocrats are living off ill-gotten gains beyond the reach of domestic courts here or in countries like America. Ever since the 2016 London Anti-Corruption Summit, moves to create an international anti-corruption court have been gathering momentum to plug this gap. It already has support from countries like Canada, Holland and Nigeria, and would fund itself from the fines it charged. Will this government take the lead in getting it underway, ending impunity for these crooks once and for all?
Well, can I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work on this issue? As I'm sure he'll appreciate, establishing a new bespoke institution is a significant endeavour, but I know he's discussed it with the Foreign Secretary, who will look at the proposals in more detail. And in the meantime, as he knows, our Economic Crime Act has a raft of new measures to crack down on dirty money, and we will shortly be publishing our second anti-corruption strategy. Will set out ambitious plans for combating corruption, both here at home, but also internationally.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, last night, as Tory MPs were once again fighting amongst themselves, the public were sat at home watching John Irvine of ITV News report on footage from Gaza of an unarmed Palestinian man walking under a white flag, being shot and killed by the IDF. Prime Minister, such an act constitutes a war crime, does it not?
Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely consistent that international humanitarian law should be respected and civilians should be protected. I've made that point expressly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Foreign Secretary is in the region this week making exactly the same point.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to rise to that dispatch box and tell the people of these Isles and elsewhere that shooting an unarmed man walking under a white flag is a war crime. Now, Now, in recent weeks, this House has acted with urgency and intent following an ITV drama. The question is, will this House now show the same urgency and intent following this ITV news report? And finally, back a ceasefire in Gaza.
Mr. Speaker, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary, and we do want to see an immediate and sustained humanitarian pause to get more aid in and, crucially, the hostages out, helping create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. I set out the conditions for that earlier in the House. The Foreign Secretary is in the region today and will continue to press all our allies and partners to make sure that we can bring about that outcome.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, access to NHS dentistry is a key issue in Ipswich and Suffolk. Locally, actually, we've done something about it. The University of Suffolk and the local NHS deserve great credit for establishing a new dental centre which is going to carry 18,000 hours a year of NHS dental appointments. However, a source of great frustration for myself and a number of constituents is that many people who train to be a dentist at university for 5 years and have their training heavily subsidised can immediately go private or actually go abroad without giving anything back to the NHS. It seems wrong to me. Would the Prime Minister support with you of many of my constituents that for say 5 years they work in the NHS, they give something back, and this will make a huge contribution to this problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for better dental access in his constituency, and I congratulate him on the new dental centre that's opening, which I know he worked very hard to deliver. And I agree with him. It's right and fair that we seek better value for the significant investment that the taxpayer makes in the education and training of the dental workforce. That's why, as our workforce plan outlined, we are exploring whether a tie-in would ensure that dentists spend a better proportion of their time in the NHS, and we'll be launching a consultation on this policy later this year.
Colm Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the week of the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, people in Derry are watching unarmed Palestinians being gunned down by Israeli soldiers. Over 25,000 people have now been slaughtered in Gaza. The Prime Minister says, and he said it again today, that he wants to see a sustained ceasefire. So my question is a very, very simple one. The next time there's a vote at the UN for a ceasefire, will his representative vote for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we'll engage with all UN resolutions on their merits, and I've been clear no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than is necessary. We do want to see an immediate pause so we can get aid in and hostages out, because the situation is desperate for many people there. But a sustainable, permanent ceasefire needs to fulfill a set of conditions, including Hamas releasing all of the hostages, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza with the threat of rocket attacks into Israel, and an agreement in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance and services. The Foreign Secretary is in the region. Those are the principles on which we are working, and I believe those are shared by all our major allies.
Sure.
In 1859, Brunel opened his rail bridge over the River Tamar. In 2022, I met with Network Rail and others to celebrate the agreement to build a simple footbridge going over the railway line in Lostwithiel. That bridge still doesn't exist, and I have no completion date. Can my right honourable friend help?
Well, I know that my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for the footbridge at Lostwithiel station, and I recognise her concerns and the pressing need for the construction of this footbridge. I'm told that Network Rail is currently working on a funding solution for this, so that it can take forward this important project in the next financial year, and the Rail Minister will keep my honourable friend updated on his progress.
Yesterday by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that 1 in 4 people in the North East are living in poverty, with the child poverty rate for every local authority in the region higher than the UK average. Too many of our people are being hard hit. Now, the Prime Minister says that his plan is beginning to work. So can I ask the Prime Minister, where does rising child poverty fit in his plan?
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the plan is working because poverty is falling in our country. Since 2010, there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty, including hundreds of thousands of children. Of course, there's more to do. There's always more to do to make sure children don't grow up in poverty, but that absolutely wouldn't be helped by Labour's £28 billion tax grab on their parents, which would take money out of their families' bank accounts.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, Bracknell Forest is a place of aspiration, opportunity and enterprise. Business occupancy rates and employment figures are thankfully high. Footfall at the Lexicon Shopping Centre is up and wages are up, but the cost of living continues to bite across the UK. What more can be done to put more money in people's pockets?
Well, it's great to see, thanks to my honourable friend, that Bracknell Forest is thriving with people in work up, footfall in the town centre up, and as he knows, almost 100% of his schools now good or outstanding. But he's right that we must do more to relieve the burden on working people, Mr. Speaker, which is why we cut taxes for tens of millions of people in work earlier this year, worth on average £450. And we've got to stick to the plan for lower taxes, a stronger economy, and a brighter future for the people of Bracknell Forest, and absolutely not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party.
Debbie Abraham.
Mr. Speaker, if everyone had the same good health, deaths in the first year of COVID, these inequalities are not inevitable. Does the Prime Minister think that cuts in social security to 85,000 low-income households, including people in low-paid work in my constituency, will help or to address these health inequalities?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we are committed to caring for society's most vulnerable, and that's why almost 20 million families will see their benefit payments increase this April, which will bring our total support over these few years to around £3,700 per UK household. The Department for Work and Pensions is looking very closely at how it can target its services precisely on the most vulnerable customers, and I know the Honourable Lady spoke to the DWP Permanent Secretary at length about this when he appeared before this Select Committee earlier this month, and I can assure her that he will be writing to the committee on exactly this subject shortly.
Jonathan Lord.
The post office scandal has affected so many people, including my constituent Seema Misra, a sub-postmaster from West Byfleet with an outstanding record of service to her community, who was wrongfully convicted in 2010 of stealing £75,000 and was sentenced to prison on her first son's birthday and whilst pregnant with her second son. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and more importantly with Seema Misra herself, who is in the gallery today with her husband Devinder, that she is due a full apology from the Post Office, a full apology from Fujitsu, and proper compensation as a matter of urgency?
And I know my honourable friend has been a great support to his constituents over all the years and has fought relentlessly for the truth to come out. As I've said, the Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. We will introduce, as I said a few weeks ago, primary legislation within weeks to ensure that all convictions that were based on erroneous Horizon evidence are quashed, that will clear people's names, deliver justice and ensure swifter access to compensation. Innocent people, like my honourable friend's constituents, have waited far too long, and I'm determined that they receive compensation as swiftly as possible. We have a clear moral duty to right these wrongs, and that is exactly what we will do.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, 3,527 food parcels were given out by Bulwell and Bestwood Food Bank. Last year, that number exploded to 6,500, with nearly half going to children. The food bank's now having to buy food to supplement donations, which can only be sustained for a short period. Rather than pretending that things are getting better, will the Prime Minister apologise for the daily chaos in government, which is leaving widespread destitution unaddressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to see anyone reliant on food banks, but while they're in place, I have nothing but praise and thanks for the people who run them. But it is wrong to say that we aren't making progress. When I came into this job, inflation was running at 11%. That is the single biggest impact on families' cost of living. And now, thanks to the efforts of this government, most of them opposed by his party, inflation has now been more than halved at 4%. And we're combining that with significant tax cuts to put more money in people's bank accounts at the end of every month. That's the right way to go about supporting people, combined with our extensive cost of living support for the most vulnerable, and all the statistics show that that support has helped, has made a difference, and that's what you get with responsible management of the British economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, I held an adjournment debate on the South Fylde line and the need for a passing loop to double its hourly service and increase resilience against delays and cancellations, which again cause misery for travellers over Christmas. The assurances I received from the Rail Minister built on the positivity generated by the reallocation of HS2 funds. Since then, progress has been desperately slow, and my efforts to advance this critical piece of infrastructure for the people of Fylde has been frustrated. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the Government can help to get the South Fylde line back on track?
Prime Minister. My honourable friend is correct that local transport projects are and must be prioritised, and every region of our country will have more transport investment as a result of the decision that we made on HS2. Now, work is underway to consider potential upgrades to the West Coast Main Line, including improvements at Preston Station, which may support additional local services from South Fylde. I know the Rail Minister is carefully considering these options as we speak, and will update my honourable friend in due course.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water are a shambles. In the recent flooding in Oxfordshire, they were dumping sewage from 270 sites along the Thames in 1 week. There was waste backing up into people's homes because of drains that they had not unblocked, and they couldn't even refill their own reservoir because the rivers were too dirty. But rather than offer a rebate for this shoddy service, they are intending to put bills up for everyone by 60%. So will the Prime Minister explain to my constituents why they are being asked to foot the bill for Thames Water's gross incompetence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been clear that the volume of sewage discharged by water companies is unacceptable, and that's why we've launched the most ambitious storm overflow discharge reduction plan, and we have now achieved monitoring of almost every single storm overflow in England under this and previous governments, and have introduced unlimited penalties on water companies. And where there is evidence of poor performance, the Environment Agency will not hesitate to pursue water companies concerned, just as they did, I believe, a couple of years ago in the Honourable Lady's constituency, where they fined Thames Water specifically £4 million following a serious incident.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for Knowsley and I published our report on THID, type 1 diabetes and disordered eating, a condition estimated to affect over a quarter of type 1 diabetics in the UK. It is life-shortening, life-threatening, and can lead to death. I'm pleased to say that Hampshire Integrated Care Board have already responded positively to the report. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government not only looks seriously at the recommendations we have put forward, but acts on those recommendations, which would improve lives, and save money for the NHS?
Can I start by thanking my right honourable friend and indeed the right honourable member for Knowsley for their important work on this issue. Of course, I know both of them speak from personal experience, and as she says, it is important that people get the treatment they need. The Health Secretary will, of course, consider the report, and the NHS has already been piloting services to support those with this condition, as she's aware of, and I understand that the NHS is also now expanding pilot sites to every region of the country so that even more people can benefit from the appropriate integrated care.
Adam Kaiser.
Mr. Speaker, we entered 2024 with starvation and famine as acute as ever across the globe, much of it caused by the climate crisis. Yet at present, the world's worst hunger crisis is in Gaza, created by Israel's ongoing siege. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification has found that out of 600,000 people facing starvation globally, 95% of them are in Gaza. Mr. Speaker, starvation used as a weapon of war is a war crime.
Aye, aye.
The Israeli government has the power to end this starvation crisis by ending the siege of Gaza and opening all crossings. Does it not, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I've been absolutely clear that we are incredibly concerned about the devastating impact of the situation in Gaza on citizens. That's why we have tripled our humanitarian aid for this financial year to the region, and, as I said in the statement yesterday, are working with partners such as Jordan and the United States to open up new aid corridors so we can increase the supply of aid getting in to those who desperately need it.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the press reported the tragic case of a 14-year-old girl who took her own life following horrific social media bullying, including on TikTok and Snapchat. Since 2010, across the English-speaking world, there's been a marked increase in poor teen mental health, teen suicide attempts, and children addicted to pornography. The United Kingdom has a strong tradition of legislating to protect children from serious threats to their safety and welfare. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to consider banning social media and perhaps even smartphones for under-16s?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the impact of what happens online on our children, and that's why our Online Safety Act tackles both criminal activity online and protects children from harmful or inappropriate content such as bullying or the promotion of self-harm, accessing pornography, and also exposure to eating disorders. Ofcom are now rightly developing and consulting on the guidance and the codes of practices for how those platforms will meet their duties, and if they don't clean up their act, then Ofcom will be able to impose fines of up to 10% of global turnover on the social media firms.
Mr. Speaker, recently released documents reveal that the Foreign Office had serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and its ongoing assault on Gaza. This assessment was hidden from Parliament, whilst the Prime Minister boldly stated his confidence in Israel's respect for international law. Since then, the scale of Israel's war crimes in Gaza have been revealed to the world thanks to South Africa's case to the ICJ. Therefore, is it now not the time for the Prime Minister to admit that he has the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands, and for him to commit to demanding an immediate ceasefire and an ending of UK's arms trade with Israel?
Mr. Speaker, that's the face of the changed Labour Party.
Educational Trust exhibition in Portcullis House and for your personal unwavering commitment to Holocaust remembrance. Mr. Speaker, as we approach Holocaust Memorial Day, will the Prime Minister join me in commending the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust, in particular their work with Holocaust survivors, who, despite living through the darkest moment in human history, continue to share their testimony in the hope of ensuring never again. In the face of the appalling rise in anti-Semitism which we see on the streets of Britain, will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment and stand up against anti-Semitism?
Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the brilliant work of the Holocaust Educational Trust and thank her for all her work on this issue. I'll be signing the Book of Commitment this afternoon during my meeting with Lily Ebbett, and I encourage members on all sides to do the same and to reaffirm with shared determination to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten and to defeat the resurgence of anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred in our country.
Final question, Sarah Champion.
Mr. Speaker, I represent a proud steel community in Rotherham who stand with the steel workers in Port Talbot at this very worrying time. My constituents don't want to see their taxpayers' money used to make British workers redundant, our primary steel-making capacity decimated, and our national security compromised. So will the Prime Minister change his destructive course, starting by looking at the credible multi-union plan to safeguard our steel industry's long-term future?
Mr. Speaker, I know this is an anxious time for steel workers in South Wales, but we are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a positive and sustainable future. The Honourable Lady will know that during the pandemic we provided support to Celsa, a steel company in South Wales, to safeguard jobs and ensure the sustainability of that plant. And what was proposed to happen in South Wales was the loss of 8,000 direct jobs, thousands more across the supply chain, and the complete closure of the plant. Because of the government's investment and support and partnership with Tata, we have safeguarded 5,000 direct jobs, thousands more in the supply chain, and ensured the long-term sustainability of that steel plant so it has a brighter future. Obviously, this is difficult, but it's entirely churlish of her not to recognise the largest support package. It is one of the largest support packages that any government has provided any company, and in the process safeguarded thousands of jobs.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Please let the chamber clear.
Quietly, please. Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. To ask the Minister if he'll make a statement on resilience in light of recent extreme weather events, including Storm Isha and Storm Jocelyn.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to say how sorry the government was to hear that 4 people sadly lost their life due to Storm Isha. 2 in this country and 2 in Ireland, and I'd like to extend my sympathy to their family and friends. And at the same time, praise our emergency and utility workers who have worked so hard in some very difficult conditions in order to help the public. Forecasters at the Met Office raised a rare whole-country weather warning for the wind over the weekend in preparation for Storm Isha. The warning encompassed even rarer amber and red warnings for wind in the areas forecast to experience the worst of the storm. Indeed, wind gusts reached a peak of 99 miles per hour in Northumberland and 124 miles an hour across the Cairngorms. Although the storm had the potential to be extremely destructive, the vast majority of the transport and power infrastructure stood up well and recovered quickly. And that's a credit to the resilience of our critical infrastructure and the response capabilities of our operational partners on the ground. Storm Isha was closely followed by Storm Jocelyn, which reached a peak of 97 miles an hour, which I'm informed was the 10th named storm to impact our country this season. Again, the impacts from Jocelyn in England were less than feared, though operational partners were working around the clock for any disruption on our transport and power networks. The forecasting capabilities of our experts in the Met Office, and the accuracy and speed at which they can warn and inform the public of incoming severe weather events does, no doubt, save lives and protect our homes and businesses. My officials and those across government working hard last week and over the weekend to coordinate the extensive preparation and mitigation measures being taken across the government. The fact that no escalation to the Cobra level response was required by the storm is testament to our effective response structures at local and national levels. I'm very grateful for the response from colleagues in the devolved administrations and also local resilience forums around the country. Our local authority and agency partners kept public services running and reacted to any local issues that emerged. So we are adapting to weather events not previously experienced in our country. And events such as these come with increasing frequency and severity. The UK is driving forward cross-government action to respond to climate risks and their impacts on our economy and way of life. Our 3rd National Adaptation Programme, published in July last year, sets out an ambitious 5-year programme of work driven by 3 themes: action, information and coordination. We're ensuring a more integrated approach to climate adaptation over the next 5 years through stronger governance, engagement and coordinated policy making. As part of this, we've established the right governance structures not only to monitor progress, but to tackle strategic, cross-cutting challenges which will drive the UK's resilience to climate change. This is all in line with the government's broader strategy as set out in the resilience framework, which committed us to strengthening the links between our understanding of the risks that the UK faces and the action we take to prevent those risks from materialising. We must continue to drive forward these initiatives that help us curb the impacts of climate change and at the same time build systems that help us withstand extreme events as they arise.
Shadow Minister Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his response. Recent days have seen the UK battered by two severe storms, first Storm Isha and then Storm Jocelyn. This is the 10th named storm of the winter. And Liz Bentley, the Chief Executive of the Royal Meteorological Society, has said that these storms are some of the worst in the last 10 years. Our constituents around the country have been hit by widespread damage, flooding, power outages, cancellation of flights, ferries and trains. And in the most tragic circumstances, a reported 4 people have lost their lives. I want to pay tribute to the emergency service workers, electrical engineers and other response teams who've been working to help people restore power and get transport moving, often at risk to themselves in very severe conditions. We owe them all a debt of thanks. Now, of course, ministers can't control the weather. Indeed, the ex-ministers on the benches opposite can't even control themselves. But the greater regularity and severity of extreme weather demands a response from government. So let me ask the Minister, in terms of resilience, given the frequency of extreme weather events, why doesn't the government have a standing flood resilience task force as part of the COBRA system with a specific responsibility to build up long-term protection? Local resilience forums have been neglected since the passing of the Civil Contingencies Act under the Labour government. What more can ministers do to revive them and make sure they're properly supported? And last week, the Public Accounts Committee said that the flood protection budget put in place has been underused since it was announced and is now expected to cover 40% fewer properties than was first claimed. This leaves over 200,000 homes vulnerable to flooding. What is the government's plan for them? Jocelyn may be the latest storm, but it won't be the last. And the very least that the public has a right to expect is that the government understands this and is focused on the job and not whatever is the latest episode in the Tory psychodrama that has distracted governance of the country for far too long.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his warm words about our emergency services and utility workers. And on his specific point about flooding, he'll have heard DEFRA, who are responsible for this, comment earlier in the week that flooding resilience in England is priority for DEFRA as part of a whole society approach to resilience outlined in the UK Government Resilience Framework. For example, the government is investing a record £5.2 billion in the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Capital Programme. Since 2021, over £1.5 billion has so far been invested in flood defence projects across England, with over 67,000 properties better protected. Now, of course, response to flooding is just one part of our resilience work that is coordinated by Cabinet Office, and mercifully in the storms that we've just had, very, very few families were flooded out of their homes, but we're absolutely cognizant of the need to prepare. I mean, he will have seen, I hope, the NAO report published late last year, noting positively that since 2021, government has strengthened the arrangements to manage national risks, that it's taken steps to address extreme weather risks as whole system risks, and I'll return to that point in a moment, and that it's acquired good forecasting data for droughts, heat waves and storms. Now, what we've seen over the past few years is a noticeable improvement in storm preparedness and response. And if we remember Storm Arwen a few years ago, after 3 days, there were still about 40,000 people without power. Now, these storms that we've just had, which are very powerful, about 400,000 people lost power to their homes. but 99% of them had power restored within 24 hours. And that is as a result of the planning and preparedness that this government has put in place. And that's because we've learned the lessons. We now have improved public warnings, we have hardened infrastructure, and crucially, we forward deploy repair experts. So when we see storms forming over the Atlantic, we signal to local partners in utilities, partners in the emergency services, and they go out and get ready on the ground. And that can be everything from clearing storm drains to being ready to repair infrastructure that might be vulnerable. We have better public information. Public is much more connected with the activity of storms. Naming storms may seem like a superficial change, but actually we know that it has improved public awareness of what's going on. We have better travel advice, much clearer, DFT doing great work through our operators. But also, Mr. Chair, we have superior forecasting. The government has invested a great deal in compute capacity and forecasting capacity that enables us to see where storms are coming. So this better coordination and better deployment of resources from the centre is meaning that we are working better with partners on the ground and getting better response when these extreme events take place.
John.
Can I thank the Minister for his statement and take this opportunity to thank his officials in the Cabinet Office that do so much that is often unseen. But for those perhaps have a little bit more of a public profile, would he join me in thanking the Environment Agency, emergency response teams for the West Midlands, the Shropshire Fire and Rescue teams that have done such a great job, and indeed Severn Trent Water and all the officials in Shropshire Council and Telford and Wrekin Council. He mentions national infrastructure. Does he agree with me that highways can fall under that? And would he call upon Highways England to do more to ensure that the M54, an important road in Shropshire and connecting Wales and England, has less flooding in the future, and they put more mitigation and investment into doing that?
I absolutely join him in his words of praise for those who've been working in the West Midlands, and I'm sure that my colleagues in DFT have heard what he said about the critical roads in his constituency.
Kirsty Blackwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do think it's a little bit cheeky for the government to take entire responsibility for the improvements, given the improvements that I know the SSE have put in place, for example. They have done a huge amount of work and deserve credit for that work, not just the changes to forecasting, for example. I'd like to thank the resilience partnerships that are in place, the emergency services, the energy companies, and also all of those individuals that stepped up to help and assist others in their local communities. It truly was a community effort. And people came together. I do wish the government would take climate change more seriously, given the incredible amount of extreme weather events that we are seeing right now. It is important for the government to both talk the talk and walk the walk when it comes to climate change, and they should be leading from the front in developing, for example, a strategy that will help to ensure that we are resilient in the face of climate adaptation and the changes that are happening, and also to put the funding in place to ensure that that strategy can be delivered. Would they also consider that in terms of some of the changes that are required, the Scottish Government does need funding for resilience? If we do have a situation where there's a massive geographical disparity in some of the weather events that are happening, particularly Arwen, for example, then Barnet may not be the appropriate method in order to fund some of these things, and it might be sensible for the government to consider with the upcoming budget process, ensuring that the resilience funding is spread to the areas which are most likely to be hardest hit, rather than having Scotland just have a percentage share based on our population numbers, a percentage share based on the likelihood of extreme climate events, particularly when it comes to resilience, would be most welcome.
It's a classic question from the SNP, isn't it? Didn't listen to what I previously said, and it asked for more money. And I have to say that the central government's absolutely not taking all of the credit for everything that's happened. Yeah, as she'll have heard me say just now, it's our partnership with people who work in emergency services, local government, utilities companies, and so on that have made these changes possible. On climate change, I'm sure she'll be pleased to discover that that since peak CO2 emission in the mid-70s, the UK government, by its actions, has helped reduce CO2 emissions by more than 50%, more than any other G7 country. So we absolutely take these things seriously, and we will continue to do so.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and the Government for their clear actions to strengthen our nation's resilience. As these extreme storms again unleash damage right across the UK, will my honourable friend join me in sending our thoughts to the people affected, homes, businesses, farms, and in paying tribute to the Environment Agency staff, emergency services, local authorities, electricity companies and volunteer groups like the Appleby Emergency Response Group in my constituency, who do so much to help people and communities through the trauma and aftermath of storms and severe floods.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, and very happy to join him in paying tribute to the Appleby Emergency Response Team. And it is so often local community organisations that both have the connections and the awareness and the intel on what's going on the ground that make response possible. So very, very happy to join with him in that, and glad to hear that although his constituency, I know, was hit by the storms hard, they've managed to move on from it quickly.
Karen Smith.
Speaker, my friend from the front bench from Wolverhampton South East asked the Minister about why the government had neglected local resilience forums and the Civil Contingencies Act legislation, most notably in COVID when that was bypassed. So can I re-ask that question? What now lessons has the government learnt from COVID and these issues in order to give greater sustainability to those local resilience forums that need to protect us?
Well, we obviously learned a great many lessons from COVID, and there's been, as the Honourable Lady I'm sure will be aware from the documentation that the government's published over the past couple of years, been a great deal of activity to improve our resilience and our response to emergencies. And my colleague, Deputy Prime Minister, gave a statement to that effect in this House in December. The Cabinet Office assigns ownership of acute national risks to lead government departments across risk identification and risk assessment, prevention, resilience, preparation, and emergency response and recovery. Though the lead government departments may change between these phases, the impact changes and different competencies are required. But the UK has adopted a bottom-up approach to manage emergencies, as most emergencies affect local areas. We have local responders, such as the police, fire and ambulance services, which manage them without direct involvement from the government. Response to larger scale emergencies is then led by lead government departments, and it's only in the most serious cases that is escalated to Cabinet Office briefing rooms, known as COBRA, which brings in senior ministers from across government. But as the Honourable Lady will have heard me say, it's very much a partnership between centre and locality, and we're starting to see the benefits of that.
Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my honourable friend to congratulate the good people of Repton and the other villages that came together to help with all the flooding that was going on, and particularly having follow-up meetings now to get more flood wardens across South Derbyshire. The flooding in South Derbyshire, I've never seen anything like it. And we need to get the Environment Agency to move on with plans for holding ponds further up the Trent and the Derwent to stop the runoff from the fields that we've had this time round. And anything that my honourable friend can do to help me get those projects actually spades in the ground, I've been much appreciated.
Thanks, sir. And I very much hear what my honourable friend is saying, and I know that my colleagues in DEFRA will have heard likewise, and she will have heard what I had to say earlier about their position on flooding. In this instance, we, in terms of alerts, normal flood warnings were operated. We didn't use the national alert because it didn't reach the threshold, and our local partners didn't ask us to use it. But from what we can see at this stage, that local system worked well and helped protect people and, where possible, property.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The consistent floods, the consistent storms that we've had this winter have meant that our communities have felt more consistently battered by flooding.
and wins than perhaps ever before. And sadly, as he mentioned, this past weekend, lives were lost. There are also tens of thousands of houses and businesses without power. Transport links were halted. My own constituency of Edinburgh, there were no flights out of the airport, there were no trains going anywhere, roads, bridges were closed. Thousands of homes were flooded. And yet, the National Audit Office has warned that the government has not set a long-term target for the level of flood resilience it expects to achieve, and there are no concrete plans beyond 2026. That could mean that any investment is misplaced and isn't actually efficient or protects homes sufficiently. So, does the Minister see that this could be a lack of foresight, and will the government commit to reversing current cuts to flood protection and do more to ensure that investment is effective?
Well, the Honourable Lady will have heard what I said, reflecting what DEFRA had said earlier in the week about the £5.2 billion worth of investment in flood and coastal erosion risk management through their capital programme, and the fact that since 2021 the government has put £1.5 billion in flood defence projects across England. And to her first point about the level of disruption, we absolutely understand and sympathise with people who who've been put in this situation. And whilst we cannot control the weather, we can by degrees become better prepared for those events, both by the general resilience planning that government has been doing, but also, as I was saying, by having better intelligence on storms that are forming over the Atlantic, and making sure that we have the right people with the right skills poised to act quickly when these storms strike. Yeah. And that, of course, means that we can minimise disruption to the public, even though we cannot eliminate it altogether.
Henry.
Mr Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Broxtowe, some businesses and homes that I have visited have been affected by multiple storms and have received the flood recovery grant. But as it stands, those who have been affected by both Storm Babette and Storm Henk can only claim after one of the floods. So is the government looking at putting further support in place for individuals who have been flooded multiple times by these separate storms?
My honourable friend raises a very important question. We know how awful it can be for families to be flooded out of their homes. The damage to property and effects, and sometimes to items with sentimental value. And it's very important that we have processes and procedures in place to make sure that we can help people out in those circumstances. On his specific point, I will make sure that he gets a response from colleagues in DEFRA.
James Dunn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. During Scottish Questions, I spoke of how Caithness and North Sutherland was completely cut off. All the roads in and out were blocked during the storms. So a pregnant mum couldn't even begin to start on her journey when a contraction started, the 100-mile journey to Raigmore in Inverness to give birth. Now, people speak of the helicopter ambulance. There's one based in Inverness, but if that has to go to an emergency in Loch Harbour on the other side of Scotland, then what does the pregnant mum do? To be quite honest, we're faced with a mum dying, a child dying. So when the Minister meets with the Scottish Government, would he please point out the utter folly of centralising these services in Inverness when we've got a perfectly good workable hospital in Wick which should be upgraded and put into full use?
Well, I'm very happy to communicate that message strongly to the devolved administration. And I've visited Caithness and I've seen its remote beauty. But yes, one can only imagine what it would be like to be a young woman, giving birth and cut off from major services. So I feel that his plea for the upgrade at Wick is very important.
Ben Spencer.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his statement. 2 weeks ago, Runnymede and Weybridge was flooded as a result of Storm Henk. And when flooding happens locally, my constituents have to navigate a whole host of different organisations with responsibilities, including Surrey Fire and Rescue, Surrey County Council, Runnymede Borough Council, Elbridge Borough Council, Thames Water, Affinity Water, the Environment Agency, and Surrey Highways. And as part of my campaign to improve flood response and preparedness and protection from flooding, I've been calling for a local flood control centre to be a single coordinated access point for accessible support and advice and for clear and consistent communication. Would he meet with me to discuss it?
Glad to hear that my honourable friend has such a worthy campaign to support his constituents, and I'll make sure that his request for a meeting goes to the most appropriate minister who may be able to advise him on how possible it is.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. According to the NAO, the Environment Agency has cut its forecast for the number of additional properties that will be better protected from flooding by 2027 by 40% since plans were first unveiled in 2020. In Feltham and Heston, also, the level of water in our streets in storms unable to drain away is getting noticeably higher and higher. So I have to push the Minister on this. Could he explain how he is confident that his plans are going to be sufficient to keep homes and businesses safe in the future from flood-related damage, and that this is the case across the country, because this is a huge and growing concern?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and she'll have heard me say a moment ago that the NAO was pleased that the government was taking steps to address extreme weather as part of a whole system approach, and that whole system approach can have real advantages when floods are coming. For example, to be able to send out emergency workers, appropriately trained emergency workers, to clear storm drains and make sure that anything that might make the floods worse are cleared out of the way. She'll also have heard me say that DEFRA has committed a great deal of money to improving flood defences over the past 3 or 4 years, and that we have tens of thousands of homes better protected as a result. We're absolutely not complacent, and we're always looking at ways in which we can improve that.
Kent Malthouse.
Thank you, sir. Can I welcome the Minister's statement and also the excellent work by the team at the Cabinet Office, who I know work extremely hard on these problems. As he will know, my constituency is home to some of our most precious chalk streams and winterbournes, and I'm sure he's aware that levels in the Bourne Valley and to the west of Andover in villages there are extremely, perilously even, high. This is particularly important because he will understand the ecological importance of these rivers and the risk of dilution, if you like, or overwhelming of the sewage system and leaking into the chalk streams. The Environment Agency and Southern Water are doing great work. There's a huge pumping operation underway to avoid that calamity. However, further significant rainfall may overwhelm the entire system. So when the Minister comes to the post-match analysis, once the weather calms down, will he give consideration to putting special priority on identifying work that is required in those areas that are of particular ecological sensitivity? There has been significant work up and down my constituency over the last 10 years by the Flood Resilience Group, by the Southern Water and the EA, and indeed riparian owners, but more could still be done, and it needs a certain amount of concentration.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his observations. I know as a former resident of 70 Whitehall, he understands these problems in great depth. And I also know that the chalk streams of Hampshire have no finer defender than his right honourable self. But the point he makes is a serious one about ecological sensitivity. And it's quite right that we pay attention not only to the immediate threats to life or to property, but also to our natural environment, because, as we know, if we don't do that, the damage can be irreparable and long-lasting.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, there was barely a part of Oxford West and Abingdon that wasn't affected by floods recently, but Abingdon remains unprotected. In 2007, we were promised a plan, and that plan was cut because of a lack of resources for the EA. But it's not just the River Thames, it's also the runoff from the new developments coming off the huge numbers of houses that have been built. So what is the Cabinet Office doing to connect DEFRA with the Department for Levelling Up so that the developers who have promised to clear the culverts actually have that enforced by the local authorities?
Thank the honourable lady for her question. And as she will have heard me say earlier, the Cabinet Office has a coordinating role which brings together lead government departments and local responders, and so it would be under that guise that different government departments would meet and discuss issues of the sort that she describes.
Alistair Carmichael.
Mr Deputy Speaker, even by the standards of what we are accustomed to in the Northern Isles, the last few days and the week, in fact, have been exceptionally disruptive. So can I associate myself with those who have already expressed their gratitude to the road staff, the electricity engineers and others who have gone about their job, and also those who are doing it even if it's not part of their job, the responsive farmers who just get a bucket on the front of the tractor and get on with the clearing of the snow has been quite phenomenal. But is this not a moment to pause and reflect that some of the changes that are proposed in other parts of government could in fact weaken our resilience? The switch off of the copper wire network for telephones, the idea of increasing the response time for the search and rescue helicopter provided by the Coast Guard from 15 to 60 minutes. These are all things which will leave us in a worse position in the future if they are allowed to happen. Can the Cabinet Office do something to make sure they don't?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I've landed at Tingwall Airport in a storm in the summer, and that was frightening enough for me. So one can only imagine what it felt like in the Shetlands over the past week or so. So my sympathies with his constituents. To his point about general resilience, the government, as I say, is trying to take a whole system approach to really understand exactly how we can work with those who are responsible as emergency responders, but also responsible for our national infrastructure. And as I say, I know that we are making progress, but there are obviously always areas in which we can do more work.
Thank you, Chamberlain.
Mr Deputy Speaker, as both the Minister and the Shadow Minister pointed out, this is the latest in a series of storms that we faced. And back in October, St Andrews Harbour was significantly damaged as a result of the sea surges following Storm Babette. Now, it's run by a trust that dates from James VI of Scotland's granting of the land to the people of the town. But as a result of the community ownership fund that the government has run, and other funds generally, more and more of our assets are being owned and run by local communities who, when faced with this kind of disaster, have no source of funding in order to be able to access support. So does the government agree that they should be looking at ensuring that there is funding in place? Because for St Andrews Harbour, it's a working harbour, it's facing £3 million of costs, and without those repairs being made, there's the risk to other parts of the town being affected in future.
Well, I've learnt something I did not know about St Andrews Harbour this morning, and I'm very pleased to have learnt it. But yes, I'm sure that colleagues in other government departments, including DLUC, are considering these very issues. But community-owned assets can be a wonderful thing, and it's very important that assets such as local ports are governed by people who really understand the towns and cities in which they're based. So I'm happy to take that forward.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his responses, positive answers to the questions that were put forward. Farmers tell me in my constituency they can never ever recall floods and rain quite like it, and they tell me it's been of biblical proportions. So I'm very conscious of the fact of that volume of rain. Hearing as I do from a coastal constituency of Strangford, storms hit with a fury possibly not fully grasped. The coastline defences around Strangford Lough and within my constituency have been subjected to a level of onslaught never before seen. Can the Minister confirm the interventions and the discussions with the Department of Stormont, ever mindful, Minister, that in the past this place, Westminster, gave substantial help financially to the department at Stormont to address coastal erosion? So with that in mind, what have been the discussions, and what help that's been given in the past can be given the same level of assistance perhaps be offered again? Thank you.
I will ask ministers from other government departments to come back to him on the specifics, but obviously, as my honourable friend will know we are very keen to see a restoration of Stormont, and I believe that the House will hear more about that very soon.
Deputy Speaker, Somerset is so often battered by extreme flooding, and in response, the River Cam flood warning system is currently being piloted in my constituency. So a stretch near North Cadbury will be fitted out tomorrow with laser depth measuring devices that will send real-time messages and alerts to residents when the water levels start to rise. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Liberal Democrat councillors and Somerset Rivers Authority for this initiative, and agree with me that we need to fund more extreme weather resilience plans for isolated rural communities?
I'm delighted to hear about this initiative in Cadbury. I have very fond memories as a schoolboy of walking around the hill fort there, and I'm well aware of the. But I'm glad that in recent instances, local government and central government have been able to work together for the benefit of people who live in the area.
That concludes the urgent question. Point of order for Liam Fox.
Mr Deputy Speaker, an organisation in my constituency where I had grounds to intervene on behalf of a previous pub tenant has issued its current tenant with a gagging order and verbally told them not to contact their MP. Mr Deputy Speaker, what can be done to protect my constituents from such bullying and ensure that their constitutional rights are respected?
Well, first, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving notice of his point of order. Constituents' ability to communicate with their members of Parliament is constitutionally important. I'm concerned, very concerned, about the matter that he's raised. Constituents must be able to communicate freely with their members of Parliament, and I trust and hope that urgent action will be taken to clarify that this is understood by all parties in this case. If the matter is not resolved satisfactorily, then I trust that the Right Honourable Gentleman will seek advice from the Clerk of the Journals, in the first instance, about how this very important issue might be escalated. Presentation of Bill, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Now, today.
Order. I advise the House that this is a very narrow bill. If the House agrees the business of the House motion today, then amendments may be tabled before the bill has been read a second time. I understand that the Chairman of Ways and Means has indicated that she will make her provisional selection of amendments soon after 2 p.m. Members who are considering tabling amendments are asked to contact the Public Bill Office as soon as possible. Presentation of Bill, Mary Robinson.
Whistleblowing Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 2nd of February.
Friday, the 2nd of February. Kit Malthouse.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about speeding offences on roads to which a 20-mile-an-hour limit applies, to make provision about the enforcement of moving traffic offences, to require 24-hour staffing on works on specified public roads, and for connected purposes. As I'm sure you're aware, Mr Deputy Speaker, life as a motorist has changed very significantly over the last 2 decades. Cars have become safer, more efficient, greener and quieter. And yet, despite the fact that the motor car is possibly one of the greatest contributors to human wealth, happiness and freedom, it has become seen by many as the root of all evil. Despite the enormous benefits that cars bring to our constituents, families up and down the land and indeed across the world, for many motorists, the world seems to be filled with councillors and officials dedicated to making their lives more difficult. Driving is becoming a minefield of potential traps and penalties, such that drivers are becoming paranoid and resentful about the entire system. When this happens, order tends to break down, and time, I believe, has come for a rebalancing. In this bill, therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, I propose 3 modest measures which will achieve a better balance, and I hope see better results generally for motorists and members of our communities across the board. First of all, I propose that anybody caught speeding between 20 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour does not receive penalty points. Rather, they would be required to attend a speed awareness course, and repeat offences would require repeat attendance at speed awareness courses. And I should declare an interest, having been myself at a speed awareness course recently, caught doing 24 miles an hour on the embankment unwittingly, along with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Not at the same time or in the same vehicle, but he was also done for a similar offence. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the rollout of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits across the country has brought benefits in terms of road safety, but it has left many thousands of drivers disproportionately punished for straying over the limit. That you can receive 3 penalty points for doing 24 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone and for doing 57 miles an hour in a 50-mile-an-hour zone seems unfair to many and is in danger of discrediting the system. In addition to penalty points and a fine, drivers so punished will Two years ago, it was revealed that as 20 miles an hour rolled out across London, Transport for London was setting a target of 1 million speeding fines a year with the Met Police. This represents a huge increase in prosecutions and the accumulation of points. Analysis of DFT data by claims.co.uk confirms that of those speeding in a 20-mile-an-hour zone, 49% were exceeding the limit by 5 miles an hour or more, only 19% were driving above 30 miles an hour, and these numbers, of course, imply that 51% of those caught speeding were doing less than 25 miles an hour. In evaluations, Mr Deputy Speaker, speed awareness courses have proven to be significantly more effective in preventing reoffending than penalty points and a fine. If our objective is to improve road safety, particularly on residential roads, then it would be more effective to put people through repeated courses, perhaps with increasing intensity and time required. This would be a more proportionate approach and achieve better road safety. Points, of course, would still apply for those who fail to attend courses or indeed who fail their courses, which I understand is a possibility. The second element of the bill, Mr Deputy Speaker, is for non-speeding traffic offences enforced by a local council or body other than the police. A first offence in these circumstances, in my view, at a particular location, should result in a warning letter rather than a fine. A subsequent offence at the same location would attract a fine in the normal manner. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a significant increase in the number of traffic enforcement cameras operated by local authorities. In London alone, over nearly 3.2 million tickets were issued in 22-23, extracting something like £200 million from motorists. The number of councils approved by the government to operate enforcement this way has increased steadily. There are regular reports in the media of the earnings of particular cameras. The most successful in Birmingham pulls in apparently £10,000 a day from drivers straying into a bus lane. A number of councils who have introduced enforcement cameras have started with a grace period, during which erring drivers have been issued with a warning letter for their first offence at a particular location, recognising that a sudden change may not be immediately appreciated by many. In Liverpool, the city of my birth, when cameras were brought in at one particular location, 1,400 drivers were caught out within the first 24 hours. Happily, they all received a warning letter first. This is a good and civilised principle and maintains public support for the enforcement system. It recognises that the vast majority of drivers will have made a genuine error, will learn their lesson and won't make the same mistake again. This very British sense of giving people the benefit of the doubt should continue, and this bill would make it a permanent feature. Anyone who commits a moving traffic offence, caught in the yellow box, stray in a bus lane, turn left when you shouldn't, enforced by a local authority with a camera for the first time at a particular location, would only receive a warning letter. Subsequent offences at the same location would attract a fine in the normal manner. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, the third element of my bill is that it says that any roadworks on an A road should not be left unattended at any time. Now, the government, as we all know as members of Parliament travelling around our constituencies and to and from London, has struggled to control and minimise disruptive roadworks. Anyone who drives in any major city, in fact, will tell you that unannounced roadworks with poor traffic management and inconsiderate positioning is a source of huge delay and aggravation. Even more so when those works are seemingly abandoned and lifeless, sometimes for days. Even in the last few days, Hyde Park Corner, one of the busiest junctions in the capital, has been beset with works and temporary traffic lights with not a soul in sight after 5 p.m. There is at the moment a polite government consultation out at the moment on increasing fines and tinkering a bit with the current system. My right honourable friend, the member for Rayleigh and Wickford, introduced the 10-minute rule bill last year with imaginative and more radical measures to address the same problem. His Can the Cones campaign hit the mark with many. But my proposal, Mr Deputy Speaker, is simpler and would simply require contractors to ensure that no roadworks on any A road can ever be left unattended. Someone must always be on hand to deal with problems, speak to the public, alert authorities of traffic issues and generally manage the site. This obligation would also provide a powerful incentive for the works to be completed swiftly, and the duty could be satisfied by having at least one person always working on the site. A very efficient use of resources, and one which would show the public that contractors are being as diligent as possible and that works are being completed as swiftly as possible. Above all, motorists would know that their safe and smooth passage through the works was being supervised at all times. Mr Deputy Speaker, I hope that these three simple measures would improve all our lives with greater road safety, greater sense of proportion and civilisation, if you like, in the enforcement of non-speeding traffic offences and less aggravation for motorists going through abandoned streetworks.
The question is that the right honourable gentleman have leave to bring in his bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Royston Smith, Will Quince, Nicky Aitken, Sir Desmond Swain, Philip Davis, Mark Menzies, Shailesh Vara, Julie Marson, Steve Tuckwell and myself, sir.
Kit Malthouse.
Road Traffic and Street Works Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 19th of April.
Friday the 19th of April. Point of order.
Very briefly, the Right Honourable Gentleman for North West Hampshire kindly mentioned that I brought in a similar bill, or at least on the same subject, last year. I'd like to commend him for what he's done. Just wanted to put on the record that the Roads Minister was here to listen. And perhaps if the Right Honourable Gentleman for North Hampshire or I, between us, put in for an adjournment debate to give the Roads Minister an opportunity to reply on this subject, perhaps the Chair might be prepared in due course to look favourably on such a request.
And the right honourable gentleman has been here long enough to know how to apply for a German debate. However, it's just possible that, that he might find favour with Mr Speaker. Business of the House. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Amendments of the amendments. I beg your pardon. Amendments, new clauses, new schedules for Committee of the Whole House may now be tabled by members at the opposition side of the table of the House. I understand that the Chairman of Ways and Means has indicated that she will make provisional selection, as I said earlier, of all those amendments tabled at or soon after 2 p.m. If any amendments are tabled and then selected by the Chairman of Ways and Means, an amendment paper for the Committee of the Whole House will be circulated as soon as possible. There we go now. Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill, second reading.
Now. Minister to move, second reading.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. And it is a very short and I'd like to think perfectly formed bill. And I'd like to thank all those who have helped expedite this simple but important piece of legislation to this point. As Secretary for Northern Ireland, my focus has always been on facilitating the return of devolved institutions and upholding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its strands. This bill is no different and hopefully plays a part in that. The UK government believes in the agreement. It believes in devolution. It believes in localism, and it strongly believes in power sharing. That is why I am today legislating to retrospectively extend the executive formation period to the 8th of February this year, 2024. The people of Northern Ireland deserve and elect locally elected decision makers and want them to address the issues that matter to them. This very short extension provided for by the legislation will create the legal means to allow the Northern Ireland Assembly to sit and get the executive up and running as soon as possible. Importantly, a restored executive will have access to the significant financial package I announced before Christmas, worth over £3.3 billion, to secure and transform Northern Ireland's public services. Address the needs of local people and unleash Northern Ireland's full and amazing potential. And this bill helps deliver that outcome and support the return of devolved governance to the citizens of Northern
Ireland. The question is the bill be now read a second time. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Another year and another bill to postpone the Northern Ireland Assembly elections. Mind you, it is worth noting that the last time we did this, something quite significant happened 5 days later when the Windsor framework negotiations were concluded. So let us live in a state of hope, tempered, as always, by experience. Can I begin by thanking the Secretary of State for introducing the bill in such a timely fashion. We support it. I have met no one who thinks that holding elections now would help resolve the difficulties that Northern Ireland's politics are currently in. But while we may be in agreement about the need for this bill, I don't think we should let this moment pass without acknowledging that the Assembly elected, 20 months ago, has still not yet been able to meet. And in any other democracy, anywhere in the world, that would be a cause of anger, not to say uproar, because the very essence of a democratic election is that the representative body should be able to meet and do its job. And I would just observe that Northern Ireland surely cannot continue to be the only place where this does not happen. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for the discussions that we have had between us. It is a pleasure to do business with him. And as my predecessor, the Honourable Member for Hove, said just under a year ago, and I quote him, "It would of course be kingdom and restoring the Stormont Assembly and the Executive should be a priority for the government." Well, I know that it is a priority for the Secretary of State because he spent so much time negotiating with the DUP to try and find a way forward. And from the moment I took on this role, I have tried to support him and the government in that objective. And now, with the negotiations, it appears, having effectively concluded, we've come to the moment of decision. And I hope that the DUP will return to government. I think the DUP should return to government. And I say that for a host of reasons, above all because the people of Northern Ireland need to have their government back. The consequences of having no government for almost 2 years this time around, and of course previously for almost 3 years when Sinn Féin walked out of the institutions, are very serious for the people of Northern Ireland. As we know, the Assembly can't even elect a speaker, so it can't meet. Difficult decisions are not being taken. The public finances are in a parlous state. When the flood struck last year and affected so many businesses and homes, there was no government instalment for people to turn to for help. None. Will my honourable friend give way? Of course I will give way.
When I was at home over Christmas, I took my uncle to the Cancer Specialist Centre at Belfast City Hospital. It was a very humbling experience to see the care and the dedication provided by the staff there in what is a world-leading facility. But the stresses and the strains were very clear, a lack of funding and a lack of direction, because when institutions and systems fail, people suffer. So this really has to be the last time that legislation like this comes before this House. Get it back up and running, or the Secretary of State with the Irish Government should find something else to sort it out.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that this is the moment to get the institutions back up and running, and I wish the person he referred to all the best with their treatment. The civil servants, of course, are left to make decisions that really ought to be made by elected representatives. And in the case of public sector pay, for example, with some workers not having had a pay rise for almost 3 years, it should hardly bear repetition. No decisions have been taken because there isn't enough money in the budget to do so. Now, that's why there was such a large strike last week, and I see that there's likely to be further industrial action coming towards us. And I think everyone now recognises, including the government, that that is not a sustainable position, and the proof on the government side is that in announcing the financial package, it identified money for public sector pay, although it is not currently being released until such time as the executive is restored. Now, if I may be really frank, I understand why the Secretary of State took that decision initially, but I must say to him that I think in relation to public sector pay, that moment has now passed, and that's why I called on him last week to release that part of the budget package so that the disputes can be settled, workers can get their pay increases, and public services can try to address the many, many challenges they face. I will, of course, give way.
Thank you for giving way, and he's making a very important point, because, of course, many public sector pay awards have been made, nearly 50 over the last year. And the only reason why the current one is not being made is because the Secretary of State is holding teachers, nurses, etc. as pawns in the game which he is playing, and the efforts he's trying to make to force us into a position to make a decision that he wants us to make and we don't wish to make.
Well, the honourable gentleman links the pay question to the stance that he takes in relation to the current difference of view that the DUP has with the Windsor Framework and the Protocol. I would say to him in return, it is equally true that if the DUP were to go back into government, then public sector workers would get their pay increase. And that's why I said a moment ago that I hope very much that that will be the case. Now, turning to the substance, I will, of course.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. Shadow Minister, I'm aware from back home from the papers, from the TV correspondence, from media statements made by those in unions. They say very clearly, and I quote them, that the problem here doesn't lie with the politicians, with respect, it lies with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who has control of the monies. He, in his own right, as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, could settle these claims for those in education, those in health and elsewhere. The monies are there. The unions say, let the Secretary of State do it. Has he heard the same story as I've heard? I've heard it in the news and the media.
Well, I have indeed heard the unions making precisely that point. And I've set out to the House today why I understood initially why the Secretary of State took that approach, but I do think that public sector workers should not continue to be held hostage to the failure thus far, and I hope that it will change very soon to solve this problem, which is why I am calling on the Secretary of State to release the funds now. Now, we need to be honest about how we got to the deadlock that the government's been grappling with, as indeed has the Right Honourable Gentleman for Lagan Valley as leader of his party. One of the many, many consequences of leaving the EU was that a decision had to be taken about what to do about trade across the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, given that everyone agreed that the border had to remain open. There were not many things that everyone agreed on when it came to Brexit, but that was one of them. And everyone agreed that the EU needed to be sure that goods crossing that border complied with the rules of their single market. There was no escaping this. And the government decided that the answer would be the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, before I occupied this role, I was one of many people who argued that the implementation of the protocol would not work as originally intended in Northern Ireland, including for reasons that many in the unionist community had pointed out. And in fairness to Maros Sefcovic, he understood what the problems were and changed the EU's approach. And that is why I genuinely believe that the Windsor Framework represents a significant step forward. It's why we on this side of the chamber voted for it. Now, of course, detailed implementation will need to be worked through. That is another reason why the executive needs to return. But most businesses tell me that the Green Lane is working reasonably well. And as I said last week, the framework is here to stay. And I make no apology for reinforcing the point again today, because it will continue to be implemented by whoever is in government in Westminster. And anyone who thinks otherwise, with respect, has got it wrong, not least because any hope of negotiating future arrangements of benefit to Northern Ireland with the EU will depend on the Windsor Framework being implemented. Because if the UK were once again to renege on an international agreement it has signed, and it's happened before, there would be, for example, no SPS agreement reached or anything else, because trust would once again have been destroyed. Absolutely destroyed. At the same time, of course, unlike the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland continues to enjoy ready access to both the UK and EU markets, which is a huge opportunity for jobs and economic growth in the years ahead. And these are the facts which nothing is going to change. Now, what the government has been doing, we all understand, is negotiating on measures it could take to reinforce Northern Ireland's position in the UK internal market. And the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley has wisely and repeatedly said, and I support him in this, that any agreement has to be acceptable both to unionists and to nationalists. And that has shown great wisdom. In addition, there is a financial offer on the table, which I think provides a basis for going forward. So after months of negotiation between the government and the DUP, now is the moment to decide whether to restore the institutions. Now, on the detail of the bill, and there's not much, I have just one question. In his press statement on the 19th of January, the Secretary of State said, and I quote, "I intend to introduce new legislation which will take a pragmatic, appropriate and limited approach to addressing the executive formation period and support Northern Ireland departments to manage the immediate and evident challenges they face in stabilising public services and finances." End of quote. Now, I take it from those words he was referring actually to another bill that he thinks might be needed if the current negotiations fail. Can he confirm that that is the case? I'm not asking for any further detail, although I hope, we all hope, that such a bill will not prove necessary because the institutions will return. Also, can the Secretary of State assure the House that as and when there is an outcome, indeed either way, he will immediately come to the House and make a statement? Oh yes, of course I will give way.
Honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that he talked in the questions to the Secretary of State about Plan Bs and alternatives, but would he agree with me that any alternative to restoration of the institution is suboptimal and is also not the settled position of this House? All parties have as their primary policy position on Northern Ireland governance the restoration of the institution.
I agree 100% with what the Right Honourable Gentleman has just said, and he anticipates a point I'm just about to come on to make in my concluding remarks. And they are these, that Northern Ireland has come a long way since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in 1998. It is unrecognisable in so many ways and for the better. And in all of my meetings, all of my visits, I've been so impressed and encouraged by the energy, the enterprise, the industry of those I have met who are working hard to build a new and better future for the people of Northern Ireland. And that really matters when we know that families in Northern Ireland, for example, have the lowest disposable incomes in the United Kingdom. And the longer there is no functional devolved government, the harder it will be for those businesses to seize the opportunities that are available anyway, including because of access to the EU market, because businesses that are thinking of investing don't like uncertainty. They want stability. They want to know there is a government in place. And so the absence of a government undermines the bright future that otherwise faces the people of Northern Ireland. And the basis of power sharing, which was at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, including devolved government, was essential to the making of progress. And of course, although there have been bumps and difficulties along the way and periods of no government, a generation on from 1998, I simply want to echo the point the Right Honourable Gentleman has already made, that we cannot give up on devolved government. It is what we believe in this House. And it is the responsibility that all of us take on when we stand for elected office. We can't really have a system where any of us chooses to put conditions on the basis of which, if they're not met, we're not going to take part. That is not how a democracy works. As I'm fond of saying, we have to deal with the world as it is, as we seek to change it into the world we would wish it to be. And it cannot be, surely, that politicians from all parties and all communities in Northern Ireland are somehow unable to come together to establish the Assembly, form an executive, and get on with the task of governing. I will give way.
I'm very much enjoying the tone and the thrust of his presentation. Of course, he is dancing between a majoritarian and a power-sharing arrangement in his comments, and so they're not quite perhaps as aligned as he might suggest. But my question is this. This is not the first time that Stormont has been suspended. In the past, Sinn Féin refused to come back to the Assembly, as I understand, over concerns about the language. And the UK government has made steps towards that in more recent years. I'm just wondering then, would he support the UK government making measures towards the current impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol as modified by the Windsor Framework? Is that a position that he could support, alterations to that, which might be helpful to restoring power and alleviating some of the concerns of the unionist parties in Northern Ireland?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I believe strongly in Northern Ireland's place as part of the internal market of the United Kingdom. And I've made clear repeatedly since I took up this position that I will support any measures that reinforce that, make that clear, but are also consistent with the international commitments the government has signed up to. If I could just pick it up on what he said initially, I'm not arguing at all for a majoritarian position. I'm not. I believe in power sharing. I am as wedded as the Secretary of State is to the letter and the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. I'm making a point about the responsibility of politicians to participate in that power sharing arrangement. It's the responsibility. And I would make those remarks equally to those who have collapsed the institutions previously and the current cause of the collapse, because in the end it's not in the interests of Northern Ireland not to have a functioning government. If I could clarify that. I will give way and then I will finish.
Well, because he's raising a very important point. The whole point of the agreement and of power sharing is that it is based on consent. So how can the unionist community consent to law-making by the EU in which they do not participate and have no influence?
Very bad.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman asks a very pertinent question, but it is a consequence, if I may respond, of a course of action that personally I didn't think was a terribly good idea, and he thought it was. And the moment we left the European Union, everybody knew there was going to be a problem that had to be addressed. There were really, to keep that open border, there were only two practical propositions. The first was the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, the former Prime Minister, came up with a scheme to try and keep the whole of the UK within the arrangements of the single market, having announced we were leaving the single market, and that didn't work out. And the second option was to do the same in respect of Northern Ireland. So it is where we are. And the government eventually negotiated the Windsor Framework, which is an important step forward. These things are going to have to be worked through. The question is, is whether the operation of the green lane, because that is really what we're talking about. Everybody agrees with the red lane. If goods are coming into Northern Ireland to then head off to the Republic, well, of course they should be checked. And that's what the red lane is for. So what we're debating is the operation of the green lane. Question, does it really make sense for there to be no power-sharing government institutions, no assembly, no executive in Northern Ireland because of a debate and an argument about the operation of the green lane? Well, my view very strongly is that is not sufficient a reason not to have a functioning government. And I would just conclude by saying the people of Northern Ireland have been waiting long enough, and now is the time for everyone to get back to work.
Yeah. Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I just want to say a few remarks in support of my right honourable friend who is moving this bill. I think it's absolutely the right thing to be doing, and I want to pay tribute to the patient work that he has done over the past few months and his officials have done. Officials here in the UK, in the Northern Ireland office, in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and in the different political parties at Stormont. There's a huge need for this institution of Stormont to be restored, whether it is public sector pay, which has been mentioned already, whether it is health waiting lists, whether it is creaking public services, charities and others relying on public purse, or whether it's the limited offer of childcare in Northern Ireland. This institution needs to be back up and running. There's also divergence happening on medicines and other issues as a result of the fact that Stormont is not sitting. There's a really good deal on offer that the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister have put forward before Christmas. That provides over £3 billion, and it will unlock many of the challenges currently facing Northern Ireland. My right honourable friend for Lagan Valley and his team, I understand, seem to have negotiated also a very good deal with the government on issues around the Windsor framework. And I hope in the coming days and weeks we'll be able to see the results of that work. I'm sure some within his party will still have concerns. This will not be perfect, but much better now, having moved forward and done so much work over the last few months to go back into the executive and to make the further arguments from there. For unionism generally, being in the devolved assembly is the key route to making the case for the union, for the NHS, for the fact that being in the UK defence and security system is better for Northern Ireland, and for making sure that any remaining concerns on the post-Brexit arrangements are dealt with. The Secretary of State has put the 8th of February as the end date for this bill. My understanding is that the government is supporting the final stages of the DUP negotiations. There's no bullying, there's no hard demands, there's just support for the work that my right honourable friend is doing with his party and the discussions he's having, and a real hope that in making the decision to go back into Stormont, if they do, the future for Northern Ireland, the future for young people and generations to come will be best served by this institution getting back up and running with local ministers and making decisions in the best interests of this key part of our country.
Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'll begin, as is becoming sadly customary now, by saying how much a matter of regret it is that we're back here discussing a postponement to elections. Very firmly of the view that Northern Ireland is governed best when it's governed locally, and that for the sake of all the people of Northern Ireland, we wish to see the Assembly return in early course. But having said all of that, we also see no point or utility or prospect of progress being made by holding an election at this point. Now, there were opportunities last year to reflect on 25 years of of devolution being in place in Scotland and Wales and in Northern Ireland. And I remember with great pleasure the special meeting of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly in Belfast, where there was meetings across at Stormont itself, but also at Belfast Castle, where those who were charged with having a care for affairs and relationships between our islands and jurisdictions had the opportunity to benefit from the breadth of experience of those who were actually involved in the peace process and in the Good Friday Agreement and in establishing devolution. And to have that kind of transfusion of knowledge and experience, I certainly found as a temporary custodian of a role of somebody who is charged with having a care as being something that was incredibly valuable. And it was also a tremendous opportunity to have the opportunity to reflect on how far all parts of the UK that had been experienced devolution over that quarter century, but particularly Northern Ireland, how far they had advanced and progressed in that time. And it also brought into sharp focus and relief, I feel, how much is missed by having Stormont sitting empty at present. So I would share very much the words of the Shadow Secretary of State when he speaks about hope here, but being tempered by expectation. Now, I always very much enjoy the opportunity to visit Northern Ireland, whether in a private capacity or in my role as the SNP's spokesperson, and to take the opportunity where I can to engage with businesses and community groups and representatives of wider civic society. And I've had much cause to be grateful to elected members in Northern Ireland across varying parties for the opportunities that they've given me to do that and the doors that they've opened and the insights I've been able to gain. And I think that what has come through from many of those visits and what I observe is the sense of frustration at how politics is presently failing in Northern Ireland. And I say politics rather than politicians deliberately, because it is a failure of politics across many strands that has taken us to this point. And we saw that bubble up most obviously in the recent strikes. Now, I highlighted in the budget debates that we had in this place, in the Northern Ireland budget, about the problems that are caused and the potential solutions that are deferred by civil servants having to try and cheese-pair to set budgets within the confines of the ghosts of ministerial decisions past. Now, I remember from my time in local government the frustration that you would get from council officers if you were unable to provide any kind of clear political direction on what it was you actually wanted to happen. And while it was always possible under different circumstances to set balanced budgets, how much better it was to be able to set them in the context of having some clear political leadership about the choices you wish to make with the resources at your disposal. So that is certainly a consideration here. It is impossible to set the kind of strategic budget directions that are needed in Northern Ireland right now, absent a working institution at Stormont. Now, when it comes to public sector pay, the Secretary of State says that using part of the £3.3 billion cash allocation to settle these claims ahead of Stormont being reconstituted would be it's a political decision and therefore not one that he is willing to make. Now, I would just say, as gently as I can, that taking a decision not to act is also taking a political decision in its own way. So the decision not to act is also political. And I would join with other voices in this place that we have heard and that we in this debate, previous debates, and as I'm sure we will hear later, to urge the Secretary of State to reconsider his stance on that, because public sector workers in Northern Ireland, the brunt of whom the pressures that are being caused are falling on, really do deserve the pay settlements that their counterparts elsewhere in these islands have been able to get. And I will just mention in passing that the levelling up funding, it was said that the absence of a functioning Stormont was the reason why the UK government was unwilling to progress with making funding and levelling up. That caused us to have a wry chuckle to myself, given the UK government's disinclination to work with the devolved governments that are up and running in Scotland and Wales. So I think there's a certain amount of cherry picking going on there with the excuses that are being offered. So punishing the people of Northern Ireland to try to bring to bear some additional political leverage on politicians has not been a conspicuous success so far, and nor do I believe it's an appropriate lever to try and continue to use where public sector pay is concerned. Now, as I say, this was a failure of politics, and the fundamental problem that has led us to where we are stems from Brexit and the manner in which successive governments chose to take that forward, lest we forget, against the express wishes of clear majorities both in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Again, I allowed myself a wry smile that during debates about the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, we were told about the trade border we'd apparently be creating with the rest of the UK, only then 2 years later to see the UK government going hell for leather towards creating a trade border within itself between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, I do remember a backbench business debate about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I very much enjoyed causing some consternation on the opposite side of the chamber by pointing out, maybe a little bit indelicately, that if Scotland were once again independent and in the European Union, would be able to enjoy free trade with Northern Ireland as a way that neither of us can currently enjoy as part of the Union, based on the deals that have been put in place. So I'm very, very clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, in closing, where my preferences are for the constitutional future of these islands are in that regard. But short of that, bringing the UK back into the single market and the customs union would make this go away. But accepting that that is not politically realistic, given the stance of the current government or the aspiring government, what I would say is that having closer alignment on sanitary and phytosanitary matters especially would be of enormous benefit, not just to people in Northern Ireland, but also right across these islands, and particularly for my own constituents, speaking selfishly for those involved in the agriculture and food trade. Bringing that closer alignment is a much better thing to do, because the closer we're able to come into alignment, the lesser, I believe, these issues become, and that is something that would be manifestly in the interests of all of these islands, whatever constitutional future we all go on to choose in future. Thank you.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Gordon. I was listening very carefully to his assertions about Scotland, an independent Scotland being a member of the European Union. I'm not sure that that assumption is actually the right one to make, bearing in mind the view of some other member states of that union, notably Spain, which I think make a reality check to some of the loftier rhetoric of the SNP about their position in Europe and the world should they choose to separate from the rest of the United Kingdom. I make that point because I think it was inevitable that the consequences of Brexit meant that an arrangement with regard to the hard border, or the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, was always going to be a difficult one. I certainly bear the scars on my back, having been involved as a law officer right through that process, and indeed helping to put together the Malthouse Compromise. Anybody remember that? Back in the early part of 2018. I know colleagues from the DUP will remember that time very well indeed. And we tried to work together to get somewhere which would satisfy everybody. Now, as the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Leeds Central said, we have to work in the world as it is, not as the world that we would like it to be. And in these current circumstances, Mr Deputy Speaker, it does seem to me that one way that we can actually find out about aspects of the operation of the Windsor Framework is for the Executive to be able to carry that out. And to see its operation, to see how the Green Lane works. And if there are operational problems, then let's deal with them. Because I'm as anxious as anybody to make sure that businesses and individuals and everybody who wants to trade in Northern Ireland and through Northern Ireland is able to do so in as free and uninhibited a way as possible. I don't want to see Northern Ireland being cast adrift from the rest of our United Kingdom in that way at all. And I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Or given way, and he makes reference to Northern Ireland being set adrift from the rest of the United Kingdom. Businesses in the United Kingdom are finding it difficult and bureaucratically difficult to trade with Northern Ireland. As a consequence, the divergence of trade is continuing day and daily and is increasing as we go. That's why everyone says, oh, the Republic of Ireland is booming.
That's simply because their supply chain has changed as well. They're no longer coming through the UK, they're getting it straight from France. But one point that I want to find out, can you tell me what engagement has the British government had with the EU in relation to changes that we need to be made to the Windsor Framework and to the protocol to work?
The honourable gentleman, obviously my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, will answer about any engagement that the UK government has had with Brussels, and he's right to cast it at that level because it is a matter between that government and the EU, bearing in mind the Republic's membership of the EU and the fact that the EU has that competence to negotiate a treaty. But it is only barely a year since the Windsor Framework was agreed. I think in all reality, again, coming back to the world as it is, I think it would be wrong of us here to blithely assume that somehow that can be reopened here and now. I'm not saying it can never be reopened. Of course, everything can be reopened. Indeed, there will be an opportunity in a few years to look at the whole trade agreement that we reached with the EU and in the review period in 25-26. But the point I'm making, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that unless we see a functioning executive being able to, and as it will have responsibility for the operational aspects of Windsor, to identify the problems, to highlight them, to raise them with the UK government and indeed at an appropriate level, then I don't think we're going to move this process on in the way that I know honourable and right honourable members opposite want to see happen, as do I. I've said it many times that the UK Internal Markets Act that we debated long and hard back in 2020 when I was Lord Chancellor contained some measures in it that have been helpful and are now on the statute book, but there was more that I think in that bill, putting aside the notwithstanding clause, there was more that was intended to be done legislatively to help cement the place of Northern Ireland in our UK internal market. And I think we should do it. And I think we should legislate. And I know the member for my honourable friend, the member for Belfast East, very much agrees with me on this point. We want to see that, and I want to see that happen. But we're here in January 2024. I note the shortness of the period that the Secretary of State seeks to extend for the purposes of this Act. I think that is sensible and right. I think, tempting as it is to have longer periods, I'm not going to call them blank cheques, but longer periods, I don't think that would be right. And I wish him well, and I wish everybody in the negotiations well in coming to a sensible and pragmatic solution that allows the Government of Northern Ireland to continue. I'm not going to repeat the points made by honourable and right honourable members, Mr Deputy Speaker. I see it in the committee that I chair weekly. We still have that inability to plan ahead, or the institutions of Northern Ireland have that inability to plan ahead in a multi-year way to provide the level of public service that I know they want to do, but which they just cannot, bearing in mind the constraints that we have to operate under. And unlike previous periods of direct rule, this time there would need to be legislative change here on the floor of this House for that to happen. And I think it's been made very clear by the leaderships in both the main parties that that is not the policy of the British government. Now that's the world as it is, I'm afraid, not as the world as necessary some would like it to be. And I certainly do not want to see a situation where there is an imbalance again within our UK constitution that will only lead to more tension being stoked within the communities of Northern Ireland rather than less. And therefore it seems to me that and I will give way in a moment, the most obvious way forward now does have to be the restoration of the executive. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. There's been much use of this phrase, the world as it is, in this debate so far. I think it is actually helpful. We must be pragmatic about it. And I just wonder whether it's the intention of his committee and their work to include looking at Northern Ireland as it is now, for example, levels of inward investment, or how business has responded to that 12 months in which the Windsor Framework has been in place.
I'm very grateful to him. We are in the process of preparing a report on the state of public services in Northern Ireland. We've taken a wealth of evidence, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman Member for Strangford and the Honourable Lady the Member for Upper Bann, who are active members of the committee. They will have heard the same evidence that we have heard. We are looking into the energy market and indeed the move to net zero in Northern Ireland, very important issue, bearing in mind hard-pressed bill payers and the particular pressures that they are under, bearing in mind the way in which energy is supplied. And of course we're looking at issues as varied as education right through to paramilitarism. I think it's right when it comes, I will give way in a moment, but I think it's right when it comes to Windsor that I think I sound a bit like CHIliwon N, in that in some respects it is still too early to say precisely what its effects are, but there's no doubt that as the Honourable Gentleman from South Antrim has said, I'm sure he's going to intervene again, there is already evidence of excessive bureaucracy and problems that are real for businesses on the ground. And I'll give way to him again.
Because Northern Ireland sits under EU rules and laws, the carbon tax offset for energy costs is twice what it is in the rest of the United Kingdom, and that's simply because we are having to take on board European law as opposed to what is passed in this House.
And again, the Honourable Gentleman is right to point out some of the facts here about the position that we find ourselves in. But I'm not going to labour the point. I'm afraid the consequences of Brexit are always going to be complex and difficult for Northern Ireland, bearing in mind the particular importance of the border and the clash, if you like, between the irresistible force of the logic of a single market that wishes to police its border very rigidly and the immovable object of the fact that the border has a particular status and a sensitivity that means that to make it excessively hard creates other problems and other issues that we are all very familiar with. That, I'm afraid, is the difficulty that we have to wrestle with, all of us. And I know that this place sometimes risks sounding rather portentous and nannyish in the way it talks about Northern Ireland. We have to be very careful about that. But what I'm saying is that in resisting that approach, it is absolutely logically correct to say that the best way to cure this issue is for the institutions of Stormont to function and function now. And I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
Would my right honourable friend have a message for the unionist community in Northern Ireland as to why they should put up with EU laws they do not influence and why they should put up with border controls when they're trading within our own country?
My message to them is simply that the message I would give is that we still need a functioning executive to work out and to bring to account in proper scrutiny issues with the framework, so that at a Stormont level it can be absolutely understood, debated in far more detail than the time and the capacity we have in this House, and for that work to be done thoroughly by the institutions of Stormont, so that this place is even better informed, and the government in particular is even better informed about what it needs to do to correct some of the problems that have been thrown up by the anomalous position that Northern Ireland finds itself in. That is, I think, now where we stand. We have to get on with exercising these institutions in order to actually solve some of the problems that honourable and right honourable members quite rightly raise. Before I finish, I will simply say this. I commend the right honourable gentleman, the member for Lagan Valley, for his forbearance, his patience, and the way in which he is approaching these issues. I do commend him. It is not an easy position for anybody to be in. All of us will have to make compromises in our political life. Goodness knows that's been something I've had to wrestle with. And I simply say, on behalf of the committee I have the honour of chairing, that he goes with all the goodwill of the committee that I chair. And I do hope that 2024 will be a moment not of more pause, not of more political vacuum, but a moment when responsibility can be taken up, the reins of government can be held firmly by my friends in the DUP, and that we can see progress for the people of Northern Ireland that I know everybody wants to see. Thank you.
Sir Geoffrey Donald.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for South Swindon for his comments and wish him well in his ongoing work as chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, a very important work that it is. And I do want to say also to the honourable member for St Helens North, who is not in his place, that of course we recognise that with the pressures on our public services at this time, we want to get to a place where we will see our political institutions restored on a sustainable basis. And as the Shadow Secretary of State reminded us, on a basis that Unionists as well as Nationalists can support. Because that principle of cross-community consensus is at the heart of the Belfast and successor agreements. And it is the key element and principle that enables those institutions to operate in what remains a divided society in Northern Ireland. To be absolutely clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Democratic Unionist Party supports the devolution. We support the concept of the people of Northern Ireland being able to elect their representatives and to have good government delivered through those institutions, the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive. And so we are very clear that our objective is twofold. Firstly, to address the issues and the problems created by the Northern Ireland Protocol as part of the withdrawal agreement of 2019-2020 and provide the basis for the restoration of our political institutions. We are approaching the 2-year mark now since my party took the decision to withdraw the First Minister, and that then precipitated a process that ultimately resulted in the institutions not being able to function. That was not a decision we took lightly. And for months in advance of that decision, I made clear, my party made clear, we wanted to see a negotiating process underway between the Government of the United Kingdom and the European Union to address the very real problems created by the protocol. And sadly, those pleas were ignored. And there was no process. In fact, we were told variously by Irish government ministers, EU representatives, and so on, that the protocol would not be renegotiated. So I stand today and I recognise that as a result of the actions my party has taken, the EU were brought back to the table. There were negotiations. Changes have occurred. And further change will come as a result of our actions. You know, as I watch the political discourse back home in Northern Ireland and I listen to the commentary of some who share our concerns about the protocol and its impact on Northern Ireland, but who at this moment in time are talking up that some deal has been done, that clearly they think they know the detail, and that it falls short of what they need or require. But I will say this, Mr Deputy Speaker. My party can stand over its record of the change we have delivered and will deliver. And I say to those who point the finger at us, what have you delivered? What has the traditional Unionist Voice party delivered by way of change to the protocol? Absolutely nothing. Not a single thing. Nothing. And yet they put up posters in the dark of the night before any deal has been done, talking about a sellout. Well, what have they sold? What have they delivered for the people of Northern Ireland? What has been their contribution to securing the change that we need to restore our place in the United Kingdom and its internal market? And we read lots of other pearls of wisdom on social media about what is needed, what is required. And we hear all kinds of speculation from the commentators about what has been agreed. despite the fact they haven't seen the detail. And there is undoubtedly an attempt to orchestrate opposition to a deal that has not yet taken place, an agreement that has not yet concluded. And the very fact that we're sat here today in this House of Commons extending legislation reflects the fact, the reality, that no agreement has yet been reached. If it were, we wouldn't be here. And yet, there are some who, for their own narrow purposes, are putting it about that certain things have been agreed, that it's all there, and they know what it is. They are entitled to their view. Everyone is entitled to their perspective. But I say this: wait until an agreement is reached before you make your final verdict. Assess the progress that has been made before you reach your conclusion. But I suspect what is going on is not about that. The truth is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are some, a tiny minority, but there are some who don't want Stormont back, who don't want an assembly in Northern Ireland, who, and I quote, would rather have imperfect direct rule than an imperfect Stormont. That is what they say. And yet they're the same people who berate the government of the United Kingdom and this Parliament for selling them out constantly, who constantly point the finger at the United Kingdom government and say, you've sold us short, you've betrayed us, you've let us down, and yet they want to hand all the power back to that government. That is not the view of the vast majority of unionists or people in Northern Ireland. And we understand that, which is why we are committed to getting a solution, to moving things forward, to making progress, to resolving the issues that have harmed Northern Ireland, our economy, our businesses, and yes, our place in the United Kingdom. I am a proud unionist. I am proud to be part of this United Kingdom. I am proud to have served my country in this Parliament for almost 27 years. I'm proud of the service that I've given, unlike some others, to my country when I put on the uniform of the Ulster Defence Regiment to protect everyone in the community from terrorism and violence. And yet today, because of the stirring up that is going on, I was threatened. Threatened. By those who never put on a uniform. By those who haven't served our country. And when I checked out, one of the people who threatened me on the register didn't vote at the last election. Can't even come out to vote for our future in the Union, never mind do anything about it. And yet they're threatening people like me, who's working day and night to try and find solutions and to move Northern Ireland forward on a basis that the vast majority of people can support. Well, I will just say this to those who stir up and those who threaten. The Provisional IRA attacked me in the past, and it didn't deflect me from the task that I have and my colleagues have to do our job and to get the best that we can for Northern Ireland. And I will not be deflected now. I will continue on the course. I will continue to engage with the government until we get the progress that is needed to enable us to take a decision about whether it is sufficient to restore the political institutions. And let's not forget, when we took the decision to come out of the institutions, it was about the protocol. It's about restoring Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom and its internal market. It's about ensuring that when goods are flowing from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and staying within the United Kingdom, they flow freely. It is about ensuring that our place in the economic union is respected and protected in law. And it's about ensuring that our place in the political union is respected and protected in law. That is important. That is what we are striving to achieve, to ensure that in terms of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, it is valued, it is respected, and it is protected. That our right to trade within our own country is respected and protected. That is what we are aiming to achieve. But I make no apology, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we're also aiming to strengthen our ties across this United Kingdom. Devolution in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland has altered the way that we govern in this nation. Brexit, our decision to leave the European Union, has altered things. And that is why, as part of what we are proposing, we want to see a more joined up, a more cohesive approach across the Union, working together on economic issues, trade issues, education, health, that we are joined up on those matters. So we're working to make progress on this. I also want to say something else, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I find quite insulting. When the Secretary of State convened talks at Hillsborough to discuss the funding of our public services in Northern Ireland, I didn't ask the Secretary of State to do that. I am very clear. For me, this is not about the money. This is about Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. And when we've made the progress that I hope we will make, we will sit down with the government and we will finalise arrangements in relation to the future sustainability of our political institutions, the funding of our public services. But I do want to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to echo the comments that have been made by other colleagues in the House this afternoon. Our public services are only as effective as the people who work in them. And we saw during the COVID pandemic our healthcare workers on the front line working hard, our doctors, our nurses, our ancillary staff, our care workers, all working, taking risks, putting themselves on the line, working hard, our doctors, our nurses, our ancillary staff, our care workers, all working, taking risks, putting themselves on the line. In education, our teachers, investing in the future of our young people, and many others who work across our public services in Northern Ireland. They deserve their pay rise. They have earned their pay rise. It is essential to the delivery of our public services that they get their pay rise. And I hope that the Secretary of State, in advance of reaching an agreement, whenever that might be, on the outstanding issues, which I believe we are moving towards finalising those outstanding issues, then I would hope the Secretary of State for 2023-24 will transfer the funding that the Treasury have committed to and enable our public sector workers to have the pay rise that they deserve. We do not want to see politics played with them, and I urge the government to do that. And today I noted that the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, Northern Ireland, have come out with yet another statement calling on the Secretary of State to act, and I echo their comments. They deserve the pay rise, and I do hope the Secretary of State will reflect upon this. So in conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, some have said that they hope this is the last time that we have this type of legislation. But that requires us to reach agreement. It requires us to resolve and finalise the outstanding issues so that we can move forward. We can assess the progress that has been made, and we can take decisions around the restoration of our political institutions if that is the way we are to go. But I am clear, my colleagues are clear. This is not about any price. We have fought hard and will continue to fight hard to get the outcomes that we need for everyone in Northern Ireland, to restore that cross-community consensus that is essential for the proper functioning of our devolved institutions in Northern Ireland. We will work at that. And I simply say to my fellow unionists in Northern Ireland, whatever their political persuasion or background, the notion that a unionism that turns in on itself is a unionism that can deliver for Northern Ireland, to make Northern Ireland work, to secure the union for the future, is not the way to go. It is not the way to go. We will provide the leadership that is required, because that is what is necessary to make Northern Ireland work, to ensure that our place in the Union is valued, is respected and protected in law and in practice, to remove the barriers to trade that enable us to trade in both directions with the rest of the United Kingdom, to ensure that our Union is stronger and that Northern Ireland's place within it is both respected and protected. That's what we're aiming to achieve. We will assess the outcome against our 7 tests that we have set out very clearly, determine the progress that's been made, and make our decisions based upon these matters. We will do so rationally and clearly recognising that we are the custodians of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. On our shoulders rests a huge responsibility. Mr Deputy Speaker, we will not shirk that responsibility, and we will not be found wanting in continuing to defend Northern Ireland's place in the Union.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I probably won't do the Right Honourable Member for lacking very much favours, but can I congratulate him on the tone of his speech and say that I did find it to be encouraging in that respect. Obviously, Northern Ireland at present is in an incredibly difficult place, and in terms of the overall situation we find ourselves in, it is fair to say that there is disappointment, anger, frustration and indeed bewilderment that we don't have functioning institutions. That is a view that's shared by the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland and indeed by businesses and civic society organisations. When the January 24 date was set for the outgoing bill, it seemed to be so far off into the future that it seemed to be inconceivable that the institutions wouldn't be restored by that point. But here we are. It is, in a sense, bizarre to see a piece of primary legislation going through this Parliament to essentially extend and facilitate a negotiation by 2 weeks. And I do have to say that decisions could have been taken at any stage in the previous
of time, and I commend him for a number of things, but in delivering a speech which had fewer words than the bill before us today, I think was a remarkable achievement. But he didn't have many choices that were workable other than to present the bill today. Of course, he could have brought forward legislation that would have addressed a budget for next year. He could have brought forward legislation that assumed powers from Stormont to here in Westminster. And he could have brought forward legislation that would have set a regional rate of around 15%. And I think it's fair in the context of this debate to recognise that he may still need to bring forward such legislation. But whilst others speculate about the intention of this short bill, and I have my own views on it and what it should have been, I think it's a recognition that there is still work to be done and a recognition that there is a commitment to do that work. And I can't say, Mr Deputy Speaker, where it will end. I know where I think it should end. I can't say what the ultimate outcome will be. But what I see and read and hear in papers at home bears no resemblance to reality. We are at one in our position. We have stood together through worse times than this. Anybody who thinks they're going to come at one member of our party over the coming days and weeks comes at us all. Comes at us all. And comes at us all for their nefarious ends, not our collective future.
And the choices will become stark. But let's make a choice on the basis of where we are, not where others who don't wish anything to work think it is. That's a challenge for us, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's a challenge for the people of Northern Ireland. That's a challenge for the people that we represent. There is nothing in standing in the position that I do today, 9 years as an elected representative in this House, 14 years as an elected representative, somebody who's lived in Northern Ireland benefiting longer from periods of peace than of troubled times. There is nothing that will shake our resolve to get this right. And I say that only with this in mind, that the Secretary of State has taken the choice available to him today in proceeding with this bill, and it does not end today. It cannot end today, and our commitment for the future needs to be emboldened further still.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not too sure why we have the bill in its form today that we have, and the suggestion we could have further legislation on the 8th of February. I suppose the generous interpretation of this is that the government still recognises that there's a lot of work which needs to be done in order to have the concerns of the unionist population dealt with. The other interpretation is that this is an attempt to put short-term pressure on the party which I belong to come to an agreement on the basis of terms which are unacceptable. And I've got to say the record of the government, and I know the government is intent on trying to put the failure of its negotiations with the EU behind it, because it's got so much internal division within its own party about how it has not and how it has failed to deliver on the promises of Brexit. But Northern Ireland cementing this agreement into the constitutional position of Northern Ireland is not good for a government which claims it wanted to take back sovereignty, and is not acceptable to unionists in Northern Ireland who have gone through terrorist campaigns and shown resolve in terrorist campaigns to stay within the United Kingdom. And we have had all of the kinds of pressures put on us. We have had the threats. We've even heard some more of those threats today about if you don't go down the route of getting a resolution here, then we will have to re-examine the Belfast Agreement. We'll have to maybe take away the safeguards that there were, because, of course, with unionists now not being the dominant parties in the Assembly, it's very easy for those who said safeguards for minorities were important in the agreement, but now just to dismiss them. And I must say, I listened to the member for North Down. It's little wonder that many people in North Down regard him now as the Sinn Féin cuckoo in the constituency nest in North Down, because he talks so much and argues so many times like he was coming from a Sinn Féin position rather than from the position of a constituency which is predominantly unionist. But we've had the threats, there might be a change in the agreement, take away the consensus. We might have direct rule that involves the Irish Republic, even though there's no provision for that in the Good Friday Agreement. And of course the Secretary of State has sought in times, or through surrogates. I know what the chairman, the member for North Down, echoes the words of the chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee in threatening that there could be big change which is detrimental to the Union if we don't come to an agreement quickly. We've had the bribes. And of course, we have also had the bullying. If you don't go back into the Assembly, then people are not going to get their pay rise and everything else. And I've got to say, Secretary of State, it does not become the current government to use the workers in Northern Ireland as pawns in trying to push us into a situation which the Secretary of State well knows is not necessary, because we have had nearly 50 public sector pay agreements awarded during the last year. And but because there is now the opportunity to use public sector pay agreements, it's being put as pressure. As far as we're concerned, and I mean, our leader has made it quite clear, we want to see devolution restored. In fact, devolution only stopped because the government refused to listen. And furthermore, not only did the government refuse to listen, but the government expected unionists to stay in positions in Northern Ireland where they would have to implement the very thing which we believe is destructive of our economy and will destroy the union as well. That was, and you know, it was an act of last resort. But nevertheless, the government must be aware that unless the economic impact of the border in the Irish Sea is removed, and I know that the shadow Northern Ireland spokesman said today, well, sure, the red lane, if you have the red lane, that's only for goods moving into the Republic, and surely that gives the integrity of the UK internal market. That's not true. There are many businesses in Northern Ireland, until they show where their goods have gone, and will have to use the red lane. I spoke to a businessman this morning in the constituency of my friend for Strangford, who told me that he had a consignment of goods came in this week where he had 151 individual items for which he had to identify the country of origin, changing product codes, weights, and a whole range of information. A small businessman. And he said, look, and he sent me the message from a major supplier in Manchester where he bought 10% of his goods, who finally said to him, I can't trade with you anymore, it is not worth my while, given the amount of paperwork. None of his goods, he operates in Newton Arts, none of his goods sell in the Irish Republic, but yet he's subject to all of these. And of course, given that, he has to look for new supply chains. And as has been pointed out here many times before, the Irish government are not behind the door in exploiting that. Absolutely. In fact, he tells me that on a regular basis, Irish officials from the trade body in the Irish Republic ring him up and say, why don't you buy from such and such suppliers in the Republic? No wonder we've had the 50% trade diversion that we've seen already as a result of this. So economically it's working, it's hurting us. And of course in the long term, constitutionally, it hurts as well, because the application of EU law in Northern Ireland, and we've seen it in the last week, when it comes to animal safety standards, can't apply in Northern Ireland, even though the law passes through here. When it comes to the regulations regarding illegal immigration, can't apply to Northern Ireland, and the danger of a passport control arrangement having to be put in Northern Ireland if we become a magnet for illegal immigration. And we even now have bills passing through here which extend to Northern Ireland but can't apply to Northern Ireland. Correct. Now, we cannot tolerate that. And unless those issues are dealt with, and the Secretary of State knows this well, unless those issues are dealt with, how could any unionist expect to accept that trade between the country we belong to continues to be disrupted, businesses hurt by it, and in the long term our constitutional arrangements and divergence occurs between ourselves and the country to which we belong? That's the challenge. I think that my honourable friend has indicated he's prepared to work at resolving that challenge. He has resolved to work at it, and he has indicated he takes personal abuse for working at it. That's a job which politicians now find themselves in Northern Ireland. But I say to this government, we did not create this problem. The government created this problem, and the government cannot allow courageous people, such as the member for Lagan Valley, to hang out to dry because they're not prepared to take on their masters in the EU.
I'd be grateful if the honourable gentleman could try to confine his remarks to 5 minutes. Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'll certainly do my best. I have to put on record my concerns, Mr Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the people that I represent, because the correspondence that I've had over the last few days, the emails this morning, the text messages, all are clear on where we are. They're concerned as unionists about where we are with the protocol. They're concerned where we are in relation to, and the member for East Anglia referred to one of my constituents in ours, and he sent me through the text message this morning. He ordered 300 items from one wholesaler in Manchester, and the level of bureaucracy that he goes through, and each one of those items, not just them all collectively, each one of those items concerns me. They say the point is the pressure. Now, I have many constituents tell me what the point is. What's the point? Some may say, well, I can tell you, they're telling me what the point is. They say the point is to pressurise the DUP to give up and go back in. The point is to strong arm the unionist people by withholding the necessary money that the Secretary of State has power to allocate but won't. And I have the greatest respect for the Secretary of State. He knows that, and I try to be always courteous in my dealings with everyone. But I can understand why some constituents believe this as they see government here legislate for something as non-urgent as RSE in schools, and yet won't give the pay raises to the public sector workers. The unions want it. The £3.3 billion is there. The 600 million that is necessary for the wage increases are there. I would suggest, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Secretary of State allocate that money immediately. However, I feel that what perhaps is not understood is the mindset of the Northern Ireland people. As a people who were bombed and attacked by the IRA nationalists over 30 years, we are not easily pressurised. We are not easily cowed. And when it comes to the protection of that which my family and many other families shed their blood for, we will not be easily blackmailed either. As for all those people who gave their life for Queen and country as it was then, and King and country as it is now, who died for freedom, for liberty and for democracy, that is what my constituents would like me to make clear today. As a representative, I want to be clear on that as well. I'm given to understand that progress has been made, and I welcome that, because we do want to see a progress made in a constructive way, but I understand we're not there yet, maybe far from it perhaps, but there has been progress. This is understandable. Again, I come back to having an issue with the way in which my constituents are feeling due to how this has been handled. Instead, I've been anxious to hear the detail of how far things have moved and what has been achieved. The result of the seeming blackmail is a distrust. The feeling that the DUP actually have held the line to do their best for the nation, when in fact is that I do believe we are heading towards something which secures, hopefully constitutionally and also practically on the ground, something that allows our traders to stop having to fill in reams of unnecessary paperwork and operate within the UK as normal. Under the Windsor framework, our shopkeepers continue to have sign-off on the THS declaration for within UK, yet when they purchase goods from the Republic, there is no paperwork. So you can understand why we're just a little bit less British in Northern Ireland and what you are in Wales, Scotland, or indeed in England. The assumption is, from an All-Ireland point of view, when in reality the presumption should be UK-focused. We want to be UK-focused. We want to continue buying where we did in the past, where that trader from Newton and Bangor, the two shops that he has. And I think it's really important that our traders are paying the accountants, and it has to be stated, and spending money and time and man hours to do something which simply should and needs not to be done. One ridiculous example among many is pet treats. Deemed it not safe to sell in Northern Ireland, but yet you can cross the ferry into Scotland to my neighbour constituents, they're safe there. And yet now, before the Northern Ireland Protocol, they were also safe. We're working towards something that allows the health service the ability to secure the same medications as NHS England. Something that enables vets to access anything needed for the animals without additional cost for paperwork or different sources. Again, this reaffirms our place within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and stops reunification through the back door. These are the things that the DUP, my party, led very ably by the member for Lagan Valley, have been working towards, and the undoubted changes that have been secured will not be easily trusted by the unionist people, not because the DUP attempt to pull the wool over people's eyes, but because the unionist people that we support and support us believe the media hype and the actions of government which appear to underline that hype. The Secretary of State is aware, and I coming to the end, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State is aware that we in the DUP will not be blackmailed, and the fact that we have continued to negotiate and secure further changes is testament to the fact that we will not accept any deal. We only accept the right deal. I fervently hope that with that the next few weeks bring about the last complex changes that are required for the unionist people and indeed for the good of people throughout the province, no matter what their political persuasion. But during this formation debate, there should be no doubt that should that fail in negotiating the correct deal, we are not afraid to face our electorate. I look forward to seeing the deal and seeing how the words on the page will affect life in Northern Ireland. Whilst I support a 2-week extension, I understand the very clear reasons why I ask government to get the messaging right. Instead of seeming to work against us, and it seems like that, work with us to find a solution and to get this right for every person of every colour and creed in Northern Ireland. We want to have a restored assembly, but it must be the right one. And the concerns of unionists with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that has to be addressed as well. The power for necessary change lies at the feet of the Secretary of State and with government. We will do our best to bring about a change and to find a deal, but we cannot and will not and must not ignore the voice of unionism. Thank you.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank all the members for contributing to this debate. We are united in wanting the best for the people of Northern Ireland. In particular, we heard a very powerful speech from the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley, and no one who heard it could be in any doubt about his determination to fight hard for unionism. And the whole House will be sorry to hear that he's been threatened, Mr Deputy Speaker. Anyone trying to bully him clearly doesn't know him. As the Secretary of State has outlined, Labour supports this bill, and we support the ongoing efforts to restore the executive as soon as possible. In the short amount of extra time that will be afforded by this legislation, the restoration of power sharing and devolved government must be the absolute priority for the government. And while I commend the important work that civil servants are doing to keep the mechanics of the state functioning, the truth is that communities across Northern Ireland need the executive and they need the MLAs to be back in their rightful place, taking the important decisions that are so desperately needed for the effective delivery of public services, for health, for education, for protecting the environment. On my visits to Northern Ireland, I've had the chance to meet many inspiring community groups who are struggling because of cuts and because of the cost of living crisis. And while all of these groups are making an enormous difference within and across their communities, they've all told me that the one thing that would make the biggest difference to their work and for people suffering from that cost of living crisis is a restored and functioning executive. Just last week, we saw the biggest industrial action in Northern Ireland's recent history, with an estimated 150,000 public sector workers joining the strike. There is clear and obvious wide-scale dissatisfaction and impact with the consequences of the current political situation across Northern Ireland. And given that the government is only legislating to push the deadline back by 15 days, it's vital that we see quick progress and that the limited time available is not squandered. As the Shadow Secretary of State has said, whatever happens, the money for public sector pay, which the Secretary of State has made clear is available, should be released so that workers in Northern Ireland finally get the pay increase that they deserve. The current situation must not be allowed to become the accepted norm. Failure to restore devolved government could and is causing damage that could take years to undo. So to conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, Labour will support this bill, and I urge the Secretary of State to do all he can to ensure that an agreement is reached and to keep the House informed at every stage. Thank you.
House, Chris Eaton-Harris.
With the leave of the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to close this second reading debate. At the beginning I spoke for a whole 2 minutes because I did want to hear what everybody had to say. I was hoping it wouldn't go on quite as well as it did, but there were very important speeches within it. But the bill itself, which I will come to in a moment, the bill itself simply says in clause 1, in section 1, brackets 1 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation, etc. Act 2022 for the 18th of January 2024, substitute the 8th of February 2024. A short extension in time. There's a second clause about the commencement and short title. And so my 2-minute speech was simply to keep within the scope of that debate, but we've managed to touch on Scottish independence, public sector pay, leaving the European Union, the Malthouse Compromise, the Northern Ireland Select Committee agenda, and reform of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, all within 2 hours. And so I shall learn yet another lesson about debating in Northern Ireland debate on the floor of this House by just saying what I think all the time at the very beginning. We had a number of excellent interventions in this debate. I'll talk about the speeches we heard, but the interventions from member for Woking, Aberconwy, South Antrim, were all interesting and important. But actually, I just want to put on record to the member for St Helens North that the whole House wishes his father well. And I know he's not in his place now, but it's very important that we do recognise that we are all human in this business. Also, I'd like to thank all those that did speak in the debate. Right honourable member for Leeds Central, Skipton and Ripon, right honourable member for Gordon, right honourable member for South Swindon, for North Down, for Foyle, who member for Foyle gave an excellent speech, and I associate myself with many of the comments he made within it, for Belfast East, and a characteristically passionate speech by the right honourable member for East Antrim, who I really do appreciate the way he put his words in his contribution and what he actually said. And of course the member for Strangford. But the one, I guess, standout contribution was from the right honourable member for Langham Valley. And I thank him profusely for the conversations we've had over the course of the last weeks and months. I know he really does want to get the best deal for Northern Ireland that works for both the nationalist and the unionist communities, that's based on the basis of consent, that means he can find the conditions to restore the institutions. I know he and his party believe in devolution. And I truly believe, and he listed the number of things that he has managed to achieve in his leadership of his party. He should be and can be rightly proud of what he has already achieved in that space. The fact he's been threatened for doing the job he should be doing is a disgrace. It's extraordinary. And we know, I mean, we're all in this place, unfortunately, have to come across, but these people are cowards and idiots. And I know they will not deter the honourable gentleman. I've noticed in my period of time as Secretary of State that the number of followers you have on Twitter or X does not necessarily equate to the number of brain cells you might have, or the amount of common sense or decency you display as a human being. They are characteristics that are personal. They are characteristics that you can display as a human being, and unfortunately some people choose to have a different persona when they're on social media and emailing, say some really stupid things. And I promise the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, I shall work with him and indeed use whatever power I have to make sure that he does not feel insecure in going about his business properly, because no parliamentarian should do. But I'd like to thank all honourable members for their contributions, as I said. When we gathered to mark the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement last year, we noted the hard-won gains of the peace process and that should be honoured by the restoration of the devolved institutions. And there is broad agreement on the main substance of this bill. That our priority must be to continue also to restore devolution in Northern Ireland. And as asked by the Shadow Front Bench, this is the immediate issue that I am completely concentrating on. They did ask, the right honourable gentleman did ask about what other legislation there might be. There could be future legislation. I do not want to be in that place. He asked me to make a statement to make sure, or when things, or should things move, that I will keep the House updated. I absolutely guarantee that I will do that, should things move forward. And of course, you know, he wouldn't expect me to not have prepared for all eventualities, and I will update the House again as to my plans if it's not proved possible to restore the executive by the new deadline. But I really do hope that those plans will not be needed. He asked me, a number of members mentioned public sector pay, and the government recognises the vital work that public sector workers carry out, and they should be fairly paid in recognition of this work. The UK government, however, does not have the authority to negotiate pay in Northern Ireland. And I recognise that the uncertainty in relation to pay awards is causing a pressure on Northern Ireland finances, and this is why the government put a very fair and generous financial package on the table to offer a new executive a non-repayable injection of help to restore the executive manage that pressure. But alongside, I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and not to spoil the mood, but the trade unions would be quite upset if we didn't take the opportunity to say they're not asking the Northern Ireland office to negotiate their pay. They will negotiate with their employers as is right in the normal course of events. Right. They are asking that the money that was secured and agreed in December be released to their employers so they can get on and do the negotiation.
And I hear what the honourable gentleman says, but that is a package that is available, a complete package that is available for a restored executive. Mr Speaker, I promised to be as short as I possibly could at the beginning of this debate, and I know we have more work to do in this Parliament on different subjects, but I hope shortly to be in a position where I can return to this dispatch box, celebrating the return of a wonderful institution of devolved government in Northern Ireland. And practically speaking, this step is the first step to secure rural assent on this legislation, first step along that route. I beg to move.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Under the business of the House order of today, the bill is now committed to a committee of the whole House.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill Committee. Now.
Order. Order.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill.
I remind members that in committee, members should not address the Chair as Deputy Speaker. Please call our names when addressing the Chair. Chair, it's got Madam Chairman here, but I think we'll pass on that while I'm here. And Mr Chairman are also acceptable. We will begin with Clause 1 stand part, with which it will be convenient to consider Clause 2 stand part. The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. Call the Minister.
Move formally, sir.
That's it, Hilary Benn? Anybody else? Oh, come on. In that case, the question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. As many of that have been say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. Well, it'll stand on the record that my contribution was longer than anybody else's during the committee's day. Order. Whip to report.
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and directed me to report the bill without amendment.
Thank you very much. Under the order of the House of today, we shall now move to the third reading of the bill.
Now.
Minister to move third reading.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I nearly did what the member for East Antrim would have wanted me to do, but I will call you Mr Deputy Speaker whilst you're in the chair. I beg to move that the bill now be read a third time. And before I start, I wish to place on record my sincere thanks to everyone involved in the bill's passage so far through the House. and their support of this expedited passage. I particularly want to thank the front benchers of all parties for their collaborative and constructive engagement. We've had a reasonable outing today at second reading on a whole host of issues concerning Northern Ireland. And I'd like to think that the tone of the debate that we have had over the course of the last 2 hours will be reflected in the positive tone that we can take in our negotiations and talks over the next few hours, days, however long it may be, so we can get to that wonderful place that I do believe that we would all want to get to. Can I reiterate my comments about the Right Honourable Member for Langham Valley and the words he said? I really have enjoyed working with him, listening to him, understanding the points being made that he makes when he represents unionism so powerfully as he does. It is vitally important, I know, to him that we get this right. And I know that sometimes that particularly can be, I don't know, some of the conversations I think we can say have been repetitive occasionally, but maybe all these conversations have a point. And I'd like to think, and I'd like to hope he would acknowledge that I have a very deep and fundamental understanding of the issues that he and his party have been outlining over the course of the last days and weeks and months. And I would like to think they are being reflected in the conversations that we are having now. I don't think there's anybody in this House that does not want to see Stormont returned, the Assembly sitting, the Executive up and running, ministers making the choices that the people that elected them would like to see. And I give way obviously to
the Secretary of State, and I'm ever mindful of the Secretary of State and just his comments there was saying the goodwill that there's been in this debate, the goodwill there's been exchanged between members as well to try and find a way forward. Could I ask the Secretary of State perhaps to use some of that goodwill to ensure that the monies that the Secretary of State has got, the 3.3 billion, the £600 million that is needed to address the payment pay agreement with the medical sector and also with the teachers, build upon that goodwill, make that gesture, ensure that the unions have the pay increase that they've been seeking, and which there is consensus in all parties in this side of the chamber for that to happen. Could I ask that the Secretary of State use your goodwill, build upon it, and make that gesture today?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his contributions, but I'm afraid I've said all I am going to say on that matter for today. But I do want to make the point that it has been nearly 2 years since the institutions have been up and running. There's been a lot of water that has passed under the bridge, and I, like he does, meet people across Northern Ireland, from those from both communities and those who are new to Northern Ireland, who've chosen to move there, to work there, to live there, who want to see their institutions up and running. And I actually know it's important for democracy too, because we all need to see the results of an election that was fairly fought delivered. We are all Democrats in this place. I prefer to win elections rather than lose them, and I very much hope I manage to maintain my lucky streak that I've had since representing the seat I do of Daventry. But democracy is vitally important to our system. Making sure that every voter feels heard through the ballot box is vitally important. So I want to place on record my thanks to those that have been engaged in this debate. I also would like to place on record my appreciation to the House authorities in this particular case and the Office of Parliamentary Counsel for their continued expert advice. Honourable members involved in this debate, right honourable members involved in this debate, knew that there could have been a different piece of legislation laid today, and that's probably where we were progressing to. So the slight course correction that we have taken did involve a huge amount of help from those people behind the scenes that make this place function so well, and I just want to put on the record my thanks to them. I also want to thank my colleagues and officials from the Government Whip's office for helping us progress in such a smooth fashion. As ever, I am grateful to them for everything they do, and I understand their pain as a former Government Whip and Government Chief Whip. But I think I can conclude by repeating what I said at second reading, that people in Northern Ireland rightly expect and deserve to see locally elected decision makers address the issues that matter to them. And I agree with them, and I genuinely believe this House does too. And I beg to move this bill now be read.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now I can see the relief on the Government Whip's faces. I will keep my remarks extremely short. I want once again to thank the Secretary of State for being punctilious, in the proper sense of the word, in his dealings with me and keeping me informed about what he has planned. To echo his thanks to civil servants, although I should think in civil service careers this is probably the easiest bill to draft, because that one line can't have taken terribly long. And the third thing I want to say is that to join in the praise there has been to the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley for the speech that he made, the passion that he showed, and his willingness to set out the argument which has united, I think, all parts of the House today, that is in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland to have their government back. And I wish him, I wish the Secretary of State, in whatever further conversations they are due to have in the next few days, every success in bringing this to a conclusion. Because the people who in the end will really feel the benefit of an agreement are the people of Northern Ireland. We criticise governments, but we look to them when we want things to be done, to help us to deal with problems, to advance the interests of society, and that is why the people of Northern Ireland have the same right as everyone else to see their government in place. And referring back to my comments right at the beginning, I think I bring my contribution to this passage of this bill to a close in a slightly better state of hope than perhaps when it began. And I wish all those involved every success. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I'm looking at anybody who wishes to contribute on any side. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many of that have been say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We're now going to move on. So those wishing to leave the chamber, please do so promptly and quietly. Thanks, Chris. Very good. Thanks, Hilary. Thank you very much. We now come to the general debate on the situation in the Red Sea. I call the Minister to move. Grant Shapps.
Yeah. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this House has considered the situation in the Red Sea. Last week at Lancaster House, I set out why we're living in a far more dangerous world. Honourable members will need no reminding. We're dealing with multiple conflicts at once. Russia's increased the intensity of its attacks on Ukraine. The appalling Hamas atrocities of October the 7th have brought the conflict to the region. And most recently of all, international shipping is now being threatened by the Houthi proxies, aided and abetted by Iran. Since November, there have been more than 40 attacks on commercial vessels across the region. It's salutary to think that it's been 30 years since the maritime law was codified in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Some 168 nations backed the UNCLOS Treaty. The UK signed it, Yemen acceded to it, even Iran as signatories. And there's a good reason why it achieved such broad support. All nations rely on global trade, and none more so than the UK, where a full 90% of UK commerce comes to us by sea. Mr. Deputy Speaker, some 12% of international trade passes through the Red Sea every single year, welcome, amounting to more than $1 trillion worth of goods. In addition, 8% of global grain trade, 12% of seaborne traded oil, and 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas all passes through this ancient seaway. Perhaps even more astonishing is that 40% of the goods that are traded between Europe and Asia go through the Red Sea as well. And sadly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Houthis' unlawful and callous attacks are putting all of that trade at risk. 12 international companies have been forced to suspend the passage through the Red Sea because of these attacks. The number of vessels transiting Bab al-Mandab was 54% below the level observed in the previous year, and diverting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope has had a crippling impact. Not only adding days of delay and vital deliveries being held up, but driving up international shipping costs to prohibitive levels. Some reports suggest shipping costs up by 300%. But what these Iran-backed Houthi pirate thugs forget is it's the least well-off nations and people who suffer the most from their illegal actions, starting with Yemen itself, where almost all of their food comes to it by sea. So at times like this, these nations need to be stood up to, and nations must stand up to them. Attacks on Red Sea shipping automatically make this a global problem. I give way to my honourable friend.
Right honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate him on his recent speech. According to the House of Commons Library, there are 12 Iranian proxy forces in Bahrain, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in the Palestinian territories, and in Yemen as well. To what extent, so it's not just about the Houthis, although this is what we're dealing about now, to what extent are we able to keep tabs on and to monitor or work with allies who can keep tabs on and monitor those dozen proxy forces that Iran is now using with increased, sadly, increased repetitiveness to attack our own interests, but the interests of our allies as well?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend's absolutely right and something of an expert in this area. Iran are absolutely behind all of the different proxy groups that he outlined and many more as well, and they are in a way able to control this without getting themselves too involved, and the world needs to wake up and recognise that. We're of course monitoring all of that incredibly closely, but it is true, I think, that as with the Houthis, with all these other groups, that appeasing the Houthis, all these other groups, now will not lead to a more stable tomorrow in the case of the Houthis with the Red Sea. And it's just being blind to the sponsors of terror that will not benefit the international order in the long run, which is why it's so important that the world has acted on this. And I will give way.
I apologise for interrupting the Defence Secretary, but the shipping side of things has seen an extraordinary reduction in confidence in that route. The only way in which confidence is going to be restored for ships to be able to pass through the Gulf of Aden and up through the Red Sea is by an increase in military convoys. I'm sure he's coming on to this, but what steps are being taken to drive up military convoys to escort vessels through that passage?
My honourable friend, as ever, raises an excellent point. That is what Operation Prosperity Guardian is all about. It is that task force which enables the shipping to be protected to an extent. He may be getting to a broader point about whether there should be individual ships protected. The view that the world has taken is that Prosperity Guardian provides an umbrella to the wider shipping. Of course, the sheer volume of ordinary traffic through the Red Sea means that you need that international task force, in this case US-led, for the security of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And this is incredibly important. I mean, after all, we are part of defending the international rules-based order in the actions that we're taking. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, last week I was actually on board HMS Diamond, who are right at the heart of this issue in the Red Sea, talking to our brave sailors who are out there protecting our critical sea lanes. The House will know that this is the first Royal Navy ship's company for 32 years who fired in anger or in self-defence in their case. And it was fascinating talking to them about their experience, but also witnessing their professionalism in the way that they have dealt with this challenge. It really did not have to be this way, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've worked hard to warn the Houthis off. At the start of the year, the world sent a very clear message to the Houthis: end your illegal and unjustified actions. Stop risking innocent lives. Please stop illegally detaining vessels and crews. Cease threatening the global economy. But all of these warnings, all of them, fell on deaf ears, and eventually enough was enough. And so, I'll give way.
I'm grateful. I completely support the government's action, which is totally in accordance with international law and defending freedom of navigation on the high seas. But we can only do it with people. Otherwise, there's no one to maintain the typhoons or to crew the warships. We now have people leaving 3 times as fast as we're recruiting them, as the Secretary of State is aware. Can you give a commitment now? He'll come to the House before Easter to make a statement about what we're doing about retention of critical armed forces personnel. He knows why this is important.
Well, my honourable friend's been very, very solid on these issues, and he and I have spoken about it through the Select Committee and elsewhere, and he'll be pleased to know that I've recently been holding meetings with individuals who he believes himself will help to resolve this issue, and I am working very hard to make sure that, in common with actually many Western militaries, armed forces, that we do have the men and women that we need for our armed forces, skilled up to the right levels and capable of taking on this challenge. He'll be reassured to know that I also went to Akrotiri last week and met the Typhoon pilots, again, incredibly highly skilled, but backed with an enormous array of tanker pilots, ground crew, mechanics, and many others besides. It's very, very important that we support them. I'm working very hard on this, and I will come back to him and the Select Committee, and indeed the House, with future plans to back up what Haythorne, Waite and others have already proposed. A fortnight ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister, relevant Cabinet Ministers and I authorised the RAF precision strikes using 4 Typhoon FGR-4s and supported by 2 Voyager air refuelling tankers. They struck facilities at Bani in the northwestern of Yemen and an airfield at Nabs. The sites being used to launch reconnaissance and attack drones as well as cruise missiles over the Red Sea, and they were destroyed. And let me reiterate what has been said before. This was limited, necessary, proportionate. It was taken and done in self-defence and in response to very specific threats and in line with international law. I will give way.
My right honourable friend for his contribution and for all he has been doing over the last few weeks. As he makes clear, this has been an increasingly difficult situation. We had no choice but to act. But can I ask, what is our assessment of the extent to which we need to degrade Houthi capabilities for them to change their intent and for them to change their actions? Because as yet I'm unclear as to whether we have that ability to look into what the Houthis are thinking, let alone Iran's activities. And we must also recognise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Houthis are at best a disobedient ally and not really a proxy, so they do have their own interests that they are pursuing.
Well, honourable friend, with her immense experience from Foreign Affairs Select Committee Chair perspective, is absolutely right about the formation of the Houthis, who, if you look back in their history, are actually opportunists. Only as far back as 2015, they didn't support Hamas. Now they claim that their entire programme is in support of Hamas's illegal activities. She also asked, quite rightly, the question of what proportion of the Houthi equipment and machinery has been destroyed. We work with others to assess the sort of battle damage, as it were. I can confirm that the attacks so far have been complete in their targets, but their modus operandi is flexibility, and they will use launching sites as they see fit, which is why our US allies have been using what they would describe as dynamic strikes as they ping up. And sadly, as my honourable friend in the House will know, that the Houthis continued to persist, even though they've been dealt a blow, and a further 12 attacks followed, including anti-ship ballistic missiles, an unmanned aerial system, which struck 2 US-owned merchant vessels. Our intelligence has continued to highlight an ongoing and imminent threat to our commercial and military vessels across the region. As the Prime Minister told the House just yesterday, attempting to respond to the Houthis after they launched their irrational assaults is simply not a sustainable way to proceed. So on Monday night, working alongside our US partners, but also with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada and the Netherlands, the Prime Minister and I authorised a second wave of strikes. These were once again deployed using precision-guided pave-way 4 missiles. They destroyed 8 targets near Sana'a airfield, taking out clusters of Mirage surface-to-air missile launchers and further degrading the Houthis' ability to hold our seas to ransom. Our targeting, once again, is very carefully planned and very precise. We're not aware that there were any civilian casualties at all, and the operation was designed in that context. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this was actually a complex joint operation involving close cooperation between the UK and the US air crews. I wish to pay tribute to our brave pilots and our air crews who carried out this action so very effectively. Last week, as I mentioned, it was a real honour to meet those pilots and the support team in Akrotiri, and each of them professional to the last. But the military track is only one part of a much more comprehensive government response, and as the Prime Minister set out in his statement yesterday, we're working diplomatically to reduce the regional tensions, making it clear, especially to the Iranians, that they must stop supplying weapons and intelligence and training and money to the Houthis. We're working with our allies to halt the illegal flow of arms to the Houthi militia. We're working and seeking to cut off the Houthis' financial support. And we're determined to help the people of Yemen, who the Houthis are not friends of, to ensure that they receive the humanitarian aid that they need. And despite the Houthis' absurd claims to be the sort of Robin Hood of Yemen, the reality is they're simply exploiting the turmoil in the Middle East to their own advantage and in their own self-interest, a point that was made to me very strongly when I spoke to the president of Yemen recently. Ordinary Yemenis have not benefited, not one iota, from their malign activity. On the contrary, they're actually the victims of the same Houthi thuggery as anyone else. It hits our and the world's global trade, and it will only in the end also hurt the Yemeni population, damaging their security, driving up food prices. But the Houthis should be in no doubt at all that the world needs them to cease and desist their illegal behaviour. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, today, as I said at the top, we're living in what feels like a more dangerous world. But the UK will not be cowed, will not retreat to our shores. Instead, we will continue to lead. We're already, as the whole House knows, leading in Ukraine, and we've increased our military support to £2.5 billion and signed a historic agreement on security cooperation, laying the foundation for a century-long partnership with our Ukrainian friends. We're also leading in NATO too, where we've sent some 20,000 personnel to participate in exercise Steadfast Defender. To put that into context, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are 32 countries involved in this operation, and we're providing half of this NATO exercises personnel. We're also, though, on today's subject, leading in the Red Sea. This great waterway is one of mankind's earliest trade routes. In fact, it was active since the days of Pharaoh, active through the Roman times, and we will do all we can to keep it active in the 21st century as well. We're working with our allies to deter regional danger, keeping these vital sea lanes open so our ships and many others can traverse the ancient waters without fear. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the situation in the Red Sea. John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The House was set today to debate the full sweep of defence and international affairs until yesterday's change to business, which gave this debate the focus on the Red Sea. And whilst I know that members on all sides will welcome the opportunity to debate and question the government on the UK's presence and on the tensions in this part of the Middle East, and I look forward to the contributions from all sides to this debate. Nevertheless, I hope ministers will ensure that we also get the opportunity soon to debate the broader aspects of defence, especially on Ukraine, as the Defence Secretary has indicated tonight in his remarks. He is also keen to do. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will give way, of course.
15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Вань. Ай, ну, маяка, я то я тут стою как...
Business committee, which I very much welcome the BBBC, it's a great organisation, but nonetheless we ought to have defence debates in government time on a Wednesday,
221, 222.
And I hope very much the Secretary of State will make sure that happens in the future.
Well, the honourable gentleman has a great experience in this. He's right to say government time signals the importance that government gives to the business that it brings to this House. So whilst the Backbench Business Committee does an important and useful job, it's government time that matters. And since the Defence Secretary has been in post, we have not had that general debate on defence, and we should. And we have not had a debate on Ukraine for 4 months, and we should, certainly ahead of the 2-year mark next month when we see the anniversary, the bloody anniversary of Putin's illegal invasion in Ukraine. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful. We've also not had a debate since the 7th of October on Israel and Palestine, which is perhaps quite extraordinary. In fact, there's an irony that had we gone ahead with the original debate today on international relations, that could have been a subject for debate, and that is now restricted by this debate. It's clear why this is a priority. That probably is a priority as well, which the government might wish to take up, which I raised previously with the Leader of the House.
Well, at the risk of sounding a bit like the shadow leader of the House, responding to a sort of business question, my honourable friend is right. He's also very experienced, and I'm sure he will find a way, just as the Prime Minister did yesterday on his statement about the Red Sea action, to talk more widely about Israel and Palestine. I'm sure my honourable friend may find a way of doing that without testing the Deputy Speaker's patience too far this afternoon. I'll give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member. Can I thank him for the remarks he's just made about Ukraine? And I think it is important in the context of everything which is happening globally that we take the opportunity once again to say that we stand up with Ukraine, particularly in the light of the changing political landscape in North America, and the responsibility that there is on all of us here and our allies in Europe, that we must send out the message that we will do everything that is needed to support that country, and that they must prevail against the aggression from Putin.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I for one appreciate the leadership that he gave to his party when Putin invaded Ukraine. And he, like us, has demonstrated that UK has been and remains totally united behind Ukraine and in confronting Russian aggression. And just say to the Defence Secretary, one of the important things that the government does by organising a debate in this House on Ukraine is to signal the importance that we can all, on all sides, give to that support to Ukraine. And also it's a chance to explain to the British public why this matters so much, why defence of the UK starts in Ukraine, and it is essential to our interests that Ukraine and not Putin prevails. I'll give way.
One way in which one can stretch the terms of this debate a little further than its precise wording without nevertheless infringing any rules is to remark upon the fact that in the Red Sea, British naval assets are particularly important. And does the Shadow Secretary of State agree with me that there should be no question now or in the near or medium future that we should lose the assets of our amphibious assault ships, which are so necessary for the sort of combined operations that one has to engage in when taking on piratical opponents?
Yeah, quite right.
Perfectly done was that.
Well, one of the other ways of stretching the limits of a tightly drawn debate, of course, is experienced interventions of the nature that the Right Honourable Gentleman has just demonstrated. And one of the advantages of a debate like this, of course, is that we don't just hear from the government at the start of the debate, we hear from the government at the end of the debate. So the very specific question that he poses is one that we can look forward to the government minister picking up and responding to when he winds up. Mr. What do I think? Well, it would be helpful to have access to the sort of classified information that the Defence Secretary has in order to make these decisions. It's his responsibility to do so, and it's our responsibility in this House to challenge him and hold him to account when he makes those decisions, and of course if he fails to make decisions as well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, perhaps I might return to the Red Sea and the theme and focus for this debate. We now have around 2,500 military personnel in the Middle East, and I want to begin by